The action takes place in a large industrial city along a reservoir. The street is quite lively, people are walking, children are playing and eating ice cream. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. The hero is walking along the avenue. He receives a message from a girl named Gina. She asks where he is at the moment. The guy starts trying to write a reply message with one hand, concentrating on his phone and not paying attention to what's going on around him. Due to his inattention, he collides with another man named John, who is carrying a stuffed paper bag of food, which obscures his entire view. The man tries to see from behind his bag what happened. He barely felt the collision. They apologize and go their separate ways. Hank continues walking and ends up in the square near the store. He writes to Gina that he is already there. She answers him with a cute picture and brings the hero into ecstasy, which scares the people around him. He has no friends at all, he's a first-year student, and is happy that he finally has a girlfriend who cares about him. It turns out that he had been watching Gina from afar for a long time, for example, when she was sitting at a table in a cafe and reading a book. The guy goes to boxing training at a sports club. While she works out with a trainer, the girl watches him and actively supports him. They met in this club, which they joined to get in shape. And while they were achieving their goal, they became friends and began to chat about completely different topics. They exchanged small stories, discussed their favorite movies, games, and music, and finally decided to go on a date, so he went shopping for dinner together. The guy dreamed that after some alcohol, the girl would offer to stay together for the night in the same bed. Dreaming about meeting his beloved, the guy began to make strange, drawn-out moans. The little girl thought he was strange and pointed her finger at him. Hank was still standing in the square in front of the supermarket entrance. People were walking around him, and the shadow of the building was hiding him from the sun. He draws attention to the black tower in the form of a screw. It once appeared out of nowhere, more than 200 meters high. But it was not the only one in the world. Various religious and scientific organizations are studying them. But no one has been able to find out anything, and the tower simply continues to stand motionless. Hank continues to fill his basket with groceries. People no longer pay attention to this tower. Their interest lasted no more than 3 weeks. And pretty quickly, everyone returned to everyday life. The guy went to the checkout, he took out his wallet and came to the conclusion that he would have to start saving from today. He handed the cashier his card to pay when suddenly he heard strange sounds, as if someone was talking in his head. Calling people to fight, the process started. After taking the card from the girl, he saw that she began to behave strangely. Her eyes rolled back. Drooling came out of her mouth, and her mouth was open. She started making strange, zombie-like sounds. Then she flew into the air, which left Hank in an indescribable state of shock. He started screaming and asking for someone to help her. Then he heard something falling in the room and saw another customer starting to go through the same process as the cashier. He screamed just as loudly. His head began to spin around unnaturally quickly. His eyes were white, and his mouth did not close. Hank was frozen with fear because everyone in the store was acting the same. The world seemed to freeze for a moment. But then, in an instant, everything passed. The cashier screamed that she was alive. The guy was very scared. She looked at her hands with tears in her eyes. Everyone around them also came out of their stupor, rejoiced that they were alive, hugged each other. The hero did not understand what was happening to them again. Suddenly, he felt a blow to his back. Turning around, he saw that a man had fallen on him. He was covered in blood, and scissors were sticking out of his head. The cashier was covered in blood, thanking people for shopping in their store again, holding scissors and a razor blade in her hands. Out of nowhere, a girl named Katie with 2 ponytails and a pink backpack jumped out and hit the cashier on the head. There was a lot of blood around. She had a huge hand with long fingers and sharp claws. Her whole hand was covered in blood. She looked like a mutant and was glad that she could finally use her essence. Suddenly, Katie was attacked by the cashier Eva with a huge mouth and a super large jaw, screaming at the girl with the hand to give her something, and then crushed her head. The people around were in a panic as the cashier used her essence. They began to request the status window to get their ability. One of them was able to fulfill all the conditions for activating the essence and received frost breath, and then froze his hand in the form of a huge club. Elvis walked up to another man who didn't have the ability yet. He begged not to kill him and prayed for salvation, but the next second his head was crushed by a huge hand. Hank's face was covered in blood. He was very scared and did not understand at all what was happening around him. Elvis was triumphant from his victory. Another unknown guy came out from behind the shelves. He was dressed all in black. His eyes were red. He recognized Hank and shared this with everyone. There was blood all around. People looked at the guy and tried to find out whether it was really the great king standing in front of them or not. Then they decided with their collective mind that since he was next to them, then they could start all over again. But to do this, they would have to kill the guy. One of the crowd took a bottle from the shelf and smashed it to create a weapon with sharp edges. He wanted to finish off Hank with his own hands. Todd came out of the shadows. He was holding sharp knives in his hands. He wanted to kill the guy and take his essence and was extremely determined to do it. Hank sees how fiercely the whole crowd is against him and how the blades of knives are flashing. He sincerely does not understand why everyone is hunting him. With a devilish smile and grin, Todd runs towards Hank, holding a sharp, glowing knife in each hand, trying to attack first. The hero fell to the floor from the blow. A knife landed next to his face. The man missed, but continued to burst into sinister laughter. Hank was completely horrified by the passing man. Todd once again hit the guy with all his strength in the face, continuing to call him his prey. It began to dawn on him that they seriously wanted him dead. Seeing how they were all fully armed with everything that was in the store that even remotely resembled a weapon. As soon as the main character realized that they were ready to run after him at any moment, he decided to start running away from the crowd of angry people first. Trying to hide from them, he tried to understand how they knew his name, why people continue to kill each other, when suddenly a car runs into him and knocks him down. Todd gets out of the car, still grinning evilly. He asks the guy not to run away, but Hank decides that he should still run and save his life. He runs up to a man in a blue jacket. It turns out to be John, whom he had encountered earlier on the street, asking him for help, as a killer is chasing him. The man turns around and asks if it's Hank. The guy happily says his name, but suddenly sees a bloody axe in his hands. John is very happy with his luck this time. He hopes that the place in the final 9 will be his. As soon as he starts to swing at the hero, he is hit by an electric shock and falls backwards. It turns out that it was Gina who came to her boyfriend's aid. She had a gun with a stun gun in her hands, and it was she who shot the man in the back. The girl wanted to know if everything was okay with Hank. He was very lucky. Since she was nearby, parallel to the conversation, she restarted the charge of the stun gun and warned the guy that John was still alive and he should be careful. The crowd continued to run towards them. The girl screamed that the enemies were still surrounding them and they needed to run away quickly. Hank didn't understand what she was talking about and why she was calling these strangers enemies because a minute ago, everything was fine. The girl looked around. All she saw was burning cars and people killing each other. She wanted to know what exactly of this could seem normal. He continued to follow her, when suddenly he stepped on something and looking at his feet, he saw that it was someone's dead and crushed hand. Nausea immediately rose to his throat. Gina asked him to come to his senses, because if he continued in the same spirit, then all these people who had changed at once would kill them both. She asked Hank to save his questions for later. Then she took off her glasses and threw them away, extended her hand to the guy and suggested that they leave. He wondered where she wanted to go, but she stated with certainty that they were heading to his house, while the tower made ticking sounds. Entering the building and hiding in the apartment, they closed the door behind them and could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Hank asked Gina to explain what was going on. The girl's guess was confirmed. She realized that the main character did not remember anything at all from what happened in his life before his return. The guy was a little confused when he heard this phrase. He didn't know what it meant. Gina suggested trying to look for a weapon. The girl began to tell a short version of what was happening. Everyone was eager to kill the guy. He was the most attractive target for them. Hank asked her to stop and exclaimed that he was completely harmless to deserve so much hatred. There was no reason to kill him. The girl went to the window. She wanted to check the situation outside. While not letting go of the gun, her boyfriend continued to be nervous, which she did not like. He was not going to relax, because just recently a crowd of his potential killers was chasing him. So what kind of peace could we talk about? Gina grabbed him by the shirt and pulled him close to her. She was angry that he couldn't understand what was happening, and in a few hours it would be night and someone would come to take over the land. The girl continued to hold him by the shirt and shouted that he had to win the battle, had to lead the people to kill the damned god. Hank was very scared. He could not understand how he had to kill a god because he could not even win in sparring fights. The whole situation seemed extremely absurd to him. Suddenly, everything around started shaking. At first, they thought it was an earthquake. Gina assumed it had already started, but it was too early in her opinion. The black tower turned green. It was spinning around its axis very quickly like a tornado, lifting cars into the air, and a game launch icon appeared before Hank's eyes. Suddenly, the main character fell, screaming in pain. Gina was scared for him. There was a bright light around, and his body was torn apart by lightning bolts of light. His eyes turned white. He felt like his body was about to be torn to pieces. Lying on the floor, hugging his body with his hands, the forced improvement of the body was taking place. Immediately after this, Gina also screamed at the top of her lungs. Her body took on an extremely unnatural position, and she was in a lot of pain. At one point, it was all over. Hank had a headache. He rubbed his forehead to relieve it. He tried to get up, and the girl was still lying on the floor unconscious. He approached her, tried to bring her to her senses. The pain disappeared without a trace. They decided that they were lucky and nothing serious had happened, as Hank noticed that he had grown a little. He felt that a strange force was seething in his hands. He thought that he was seeing hallucinations. He did not understand what kind of blue screen with a status he was seeing before his eyes. Gina quickly explained that this was a parameter window and in the future he would get tired of staring at it, and his characteristics were still at a basic level. Hank noticed that the girl's appearance had changed slightly. Her proportions had increased. Their bodies had been forcibly improved to the limit. While he was examining his new body, the girl saw through the window that the city was completely destroyed, and now there were 2 moons shining in the sky. They found themselves in a multi-world created by the Black Tower. With each new rotation of the tower, another world is superimposed on the Earth. Now all the people of this world are going through a return. This means that the memories from the future are returning. Ginny's memory has also returned. Hank didn't understand what future they were talking about. The girl explained that it was different from the future he imagined, and God gave everyone according to their ability. The abilities are called essence. People can take them from each other. Thus, they were forced to play a deadly game called enlightenment. No matter who started it, from that moment on, a battle to the death broke out. Many died, and among the people, 9 people stood out whose power surpassed that of a god. They were called the Phenomenal 9. Gina persistently asked the guy to remember before he was nicknamed the Great King, since he was part of the strongest 9, but he heard about it for the first time. Hank decided that they wanted to kill him because of the entity. Suddenly, the girl bent in half and then flew into the air. She was spinning around herself. Her essence is a flexible, rubber-like body. Its capabilities go beyond human ones. She can bend both forward and backward. In total, you can get 2 essences. One is given initially, the other is obtained from the first killed source. He was interested in which essence he got. Gina suggested that he concentrate and see for himself. He discovered the taste of steel and beyond the horizon, which he received when he killed Casita. Outside their apartment, people continued to fight and kill each other non-stop in pursuit of new entities. Suddenly, the tower began to release golden glowing feathers. A huge egg appeared from the sky. It fell to the ground and something began to emerge from it. Hank and Gina stood on the balcony and tried to figure out who it was that appeared with huge wings, in a white robe and with a golden staff in his hands. This Superman slowly landed on the very top of the tower, icy tears flowing from his eyes. He raised his staff above his head and then a pillar of light rose around the tower. Hank tried to catch the golden feather. He wanted to know what it was. Finally, the feather fell into his palm and, in an instant, he disappeared. Noticing Hank trying to catch the feather, Gina yelled at him, trying to prevent him from making a mistake, but it was too late. Realizing that he had disappeared without a trace, she abruptly opened the door of their apartment and ran out of it with all her might. She did not expect that enlightenment would begin so soon. She ran down the hallway of the house where Hank lives. She was sure that he would be okay. He was a great king and would cope with the trials. Strange things are happening in the world. Golden feathers are flying around. They explode and open portals of bright light. A man with a blade in his hands laughs. Hank falls from one of these portals onto an unfamiliar land. He's in a daze. His clothes are covered in blood. He hit his head hard. Looking around, he realizes that he has been thrown to the foot of the Black Tower and is surprised at how this is possible in just a second. Something that looks like golden bird starts falling from the top of the tower. People around try to figure out who this angel is and what is happening. One of the angels, David, announced that they were all in a specially isolated area and now they would have to go through a difficult test. He sent previously unknown creatures to Earth and ordered them to be dealt with first. but they looked quite friendly. One of the participants approached the creatures. He was scared at first, but as soon as he saw that they were very small, he relaxed. He was wondering what kind of isolated zone they could be talking about. The angel looked at him with a withering gaze and declared that they were underestimating them, then made a clicking sound, and the next second the creatures attacked the man. The winged creatures hovered around the tower and laughed at the stupidity of people. David declared that he was already tired of coddling them. Hank listened to them attentively, but still did not understand what they meant by cooing. Yellow liquid began to fall on the people around them. A large amount fell on a man standing nearby. It flowed down his hands. He tried to remove it with disgust, saying that it smelled disgusting. The monsters began to get out of control. They continued to kill everyone who stood in their way. They no longer looked friendly. They were huge and terrifying. There were a lot of them. They were armed, and they were advancing on Hank and the people standing nearby. David stated that a special pheromone that he had just sprayed would stimulate the goblins a little, and that those who scored the most points for killing them would be rewarded. He declared the battle to begin. The creatures rushed to attack. The people began to fight back. The man with the ponytail, Derek, received coins for killing the goblin. One girl shared that her first essence accelerates the growth of plants, and the second allows her to control objects. She was able to grow a huge, cruel plant with her abilities, which pierced several goblins with its branches, and she also received coins as a reward. Derek wondered why they called this test the hardest. The bites of these monsters were like tickles to him. He saw Hank just standing at a distance, and he was very interested in why he was frozen with fear and called him a disgrace. Before the man could finish his sentence, goblins suddenly attacked him from behind and pierced his body from several sides with their sharp sticks. Another girl participant tried to run away from the monsters, but they caught up with her and grabbed her. She screamed, asking to let her go, trying to fight them off. Another guy, trying to break away from the chase, did not understand what was wrong with them. They did not die, but continued to advance and come back to life like zombies. Suddenly, Hank felt someone grab his leg. He turned around and saw a severed body. Although his head was still conscious and asking for help, the angels continued to look down on the people fighting the goblins. David found it funny that the participants called what was happening a test. Hank was very angry from what he heard. He called it nonsense. He was very upset by what he saw as an attack of many monsters on one unarmed girl. He decided to protect her, took some kind of stick, and began to fight the girl off the goblins, shouting at them not to come near and get away. Turning to her to see if she was okay, he asked her to take shelter somewhere, but saw that her body had already been torn apart and she was dead. The angels continued to watch what was happening. They laughed at the people, saying that they warned them that the test would be difficult and extraordinary. Seeing that the monsters were not dying, there were more and more of them. They were becoming stronger and more bloodthirsty. People began to doubt that they had any chance of surviving in this unequal battle. The world around changed dramatically. Huge, sharp rocks emerged from the ground. Buildings were destroyed, and everything around was overgrown with trees and plants. Hank armed himself with a fire extinguisher and killed the goblins one by hitting them on the head. Then he went down the stairs to the bottom of the city. Hugging the fire extinguisher, he sat down on the ground. The guy was very tired, and he was tormented by the question of how many more of these creatures he had to kill. They just wouldn't die. But new ones appeared in geometric order. The phone fell out of the hero's pocket. He noticed Gina's photo on the screen. He wanted to find her at all costs. Later decided to request the status and noticed that his indicators had changed. He chose durability from his abilities because he wanted to know the details. It was possible to buy additional points for coins. Hank definitely didn't want to die so early, so he agreed to have his ability upgraded, and the changes immediately took effect. He heard someone laughing from around the corner. Turning around, he met another participant. He looked scary and was covered in blood. Russell licked the blood off his face, wanting to know how Hank was feeling and if he had been able to find a good element, because the goblins he had killed hadn't dropped anything worthwhile. Hank realized that this conversation did not bode well for the future, and he was mentally prepared for the attack and was able to fight off the enemy. Then the hero threw him to the floor and then began to strangle him, screaming with excitement and fear, and did not remove his hand from his opponent's throat until he was sure that he was dead. Hank continued to sit on top of Russell's body. The hero tried to understand whether the guy was dead and what would happen to him next. But suddenly he felt a powerful blow from a knife in the shoulder. The enemy laughed with delight. He was glad to outwit the great king. One of his new entities that he received after the murder was to pretend to be dead. He pulled the knife out of his shoulder, thus making the wound wider. Blood splashed out everywhere. Hank began to scream in pain. Russell pinned the guy to the floor and then jumped on him with all his might. He said that if he really wanted to kill him, then he should be ready to cut his throat. He explained that the wounds inflicted by his knife would not heal, and if left as is, he would die from blood loss, so he would cut until he died. The attacker was sure that the main character also had an unfortunate element in his essence, and he also called him a weakling. Russell continued to beat the poor guy with a knife, repeating like a mantra for him to die quickly. Hank was already bleeding very heavily. It was even pouring out of his mouth. The guy didn't want to die in that place. His subconscious forced him to come to his senses, and eventually he was able to fulfill the conditions for activating his essence. The taste of steel. The wild-eyed attacker continued to stab the guy with a knife, when suddenly the knife hit Hank's palm. His ability was able to recognize the object the man was beating him with. Thus, he learned what the blade was made of, and also that the object could be given an order with a command. And in order to absorb the object's abilities, it was necessary to pronounce the word food. As soon as Hank said the key word, the blade in his hand burst into a bright flame and engulfed everything around. The enemy was dumbfounded by what he saw. The wound in his arm began to heal. His pupils began to glow golden. The blood from his nose and mouth, as well as all the other wounds, quickly disappeared. The man only had time to see that Hank had fully recovered when he received a punch in the face and hit the floor with all his might. The hero had already resigned himself to the fact that he would die, and he had no idea how the changes had happened. He felt very exhausted after everything. Hank was already picking up his fire extinguisher. Russell was trying to figure out if he was healed immediately after eating the element, because then it turns out that he is a great king. The hero did not quite understand what his opponent was saying, but he understood that he could not stop. So he picked up the fire extinguisher and hit the man in the face, knocking out several teeth. He continued to hit the man with his chosen weapon. He hit furiously and without stopping, breaking his legs and arms with his blows until Russell stopped moving completely. For killing a man, he was given coins as a reward. Hank was very scared, realizing that he had done all this and could not understand why they would give a reward for it. Hank was completely exhausted. His body had stopped responding to him. He knew he would soon pass out, and it would be very bad if he stayed there. The activation of the second entity occurred. Supercompensation, when after an extremely strong stimulus, its abilities increase in proportion to the impact of the stimulus. When the hero woke up, it was already dawn. His stats had grown significantly. He did not understand why his abilities had improved without coins. Suddenly, he heard someone screaming and asking for help. This man was begging them to stop because he had just arrived after returning. Hank saw how this helpless boy was wrapped in huge long chains with sharp curved tips. They pierced his head and shoulders through and through. Another angel, Michael, appeared in the window. He greeted the hero and asked who he was. He doubted that they had met before. Angel was angry because he thought Hank wanted to sneak away. He doubted the guy had any motivation to do anything. The hero remembered that he had already seen Michael. He was at the tower from the very beginning, when the monsters began to kill people. He thought that it all started with him. Hank was furious. He decided to try his chance and ran at the enemy with a fire extinguisher in his hands. But the winged creature easily repelled the attack. Michael laughed at the guy's actions, called him stupid because he decided to try to attack the angel. He became interested in him. Angel admitted that Hank was not like the people he usually tortured and killed, so the guy asked the logical question. Why do they do this at all? Michael didn't know what to answer at first, but then explained that perhaps this was all happening because the field of education had not moved forward in the past 3 days. Hank was very surprised by his words. He did not understand how so much time could have passed, how he could have slept for 3 whole days. Then the angel grabbed him by the clothes and pulled the guy along with him. He thought it was funny and assumed that since he was slacking off, it meant he was confident in his abilities. Hank started to struggle and asked to let him go. Michael threw him to the ground. He sympathized with the guy that he had relaxed too much. He dragged him outside to show him something with chains that had recently killed a guy in front of Hank. It turned out to be the final boss. Meanwhile, on the street, people started asking for the next test and hoped that there would be goblins again, because they could earn a lot of coins. David was very pleased with such determination, and therefore he initiated the opening of the gate and called the named monster and offered people to catch the bonus. He was sure that they would appreciate it. The final boss began to loosen his chains. He beheaded and dismembered the bodies of people. He's called the Killer Chichek. Many survivors ran away from him. Michael approached Hank. He offered him to challenge a named monster. If he could kill it, he would receive a whole bunch of coins. But seeing how many dead people were lying on the ground, he assumed that it would be difficult to stay alive with a mediocre approach. A new opponent came out to fight Chichek. He was armed with a large knife. He began to run around the monster at great speed, but was killed almost immediately. The angel applauded the boss's victory, deciding that his opponent had underestimated the monster's dynamic vision. That is, its ability to track a fast-moving object. Michael and David, sitting on the road sign, advised people to quickly earn coins and increase their status. Otherwise, with such a level of ability, they will not be able to swat a fly. People around were outraged, calling them bullies. They did not understand how they could earn coins if there were no goblins. David chuckled at this reaction. He asked them not to slow down, because you can kill not only goblins to get coins. People started hunting each other. Everyone started activating their essences. Hank became interested in how much he would get if he killed the monster. But you can only find out by winning. Then Hank assumed that if he wants to escape, he will be killed. And if he does nothing, he will die. So he decided to choose his own ending. Suddenly, a guy with a claw instead of a hand tried to attack him from behind. But Hank activated the barbed chain, and the enemy was unable to move his body. It turned out that it was Michael who wanted to help Hank and protect him. He didn't want anyone to interfere with the guy coming up with a plan to defeat Chichek. In the end, the winged creature decided to reveal the secret of the reward for killing the boss. The item that would drop from him would give an undeniable advantage in future battles, and he guaranteed it. The angel encouraged the hero. He pushed him to enter the battle and use his chance. He had a premonition of an interesting fight between them. Hank decided to go to the monster with bare hands. Everyone around did not understand why he was taking such a risk. Perhaps he was so confident in his essence. Michael was flying after him. He was laughing and was very interested in what the guy's plan was. He shared that the monster had a wide attack radius and the sickles were not so easy to dodge. Opening the scoreboard of Chichek's talents, Hank learned that they were equal in physical strength, but the guy had higher durability and speed. He considered that the advantage was on his side. The hero picked up speed, but the monster knocked him down with the first blow, and although he didn't hit him, the guy realized that he couldn't dodge the hook. With the next blow, he threw the guy back, and he hit a pole. He howled in pain. The hook hit the ground and broke the asphalt, pieces of which showered the hero. Hank was not going to give up. He gathered all his strength into a fist and decided to try to hit the monster in a jump, but the hook caught him on the shoulder and pierced him. He howled in pain. Then the boss began to wind the chain around his hand. Thus he pulled the guy closer and closer to himself. The hero could not stop him. The battle continued. Then the monster threw Hank right onto the roof of the car. The guy was already practically unconscious and covered in blood. The witnesses of what was happening looked at everything with a bit of doubt. They did not understand whether the guy had a plan from the beginning. It was felt that he went to fight with only one fighting spirit. Hank was afraid that he was actually dying. His shoulder and leg were pierced by hooks. The monster was pulling him closer and closer, but Hank decided to fight. He pulled the hook out of his shoulder, freed himself from the shackles, and then activated the unique skill Taste of Steel using his code word food. He started activating. His whole body was on fire. The monster watched this action and did not understand what was happening, when suddenly he hit him in the head with all his might. The observers realized that he had eaten his element. They noticed that his wound had healed. Hank continued to strike at the boss while screaming shrilly from overexertion. But the monster was not going to give up. He swung and pierced the guy's cheek with his hook, but the hero kicked him in the face, thereby throwing him to the ground. Hank didn't finish his opponent's beat. He broke his shoulder joint, causing an open fracture of the bone in his arm. The guy continued his offensive movements and beat the monster with all the force of his fist, while the hook continued to stick out of his cheek. Hank went wild. He didn't stop and hit the boss in the head and body until his head was driven deep into the asphalt, and he was completely covered in the enemy's blood. The people around were very surprised by this state of affairs. They recognized Hank as a great king. Only his essence could do this. The guy started to pull the hook out of his cheek, while he was trying to activate his skill using the code word. Hank was not happy that the observers recognized him. He did not understand why he met them and why they knew him, and for what purpose they were trying to kill him. And although the reasons were unknown to him, he advised them all not to come near him. The angel watched him and continued to laugh at his words. But the guy continued his tirade. He warned that if they ignored his words, then they should not expect any mercy from him. People around were discussing whether they really saw Hank, and many, recognizing him, decided to try to kill him so they could have a chance to become the strongest. Many began to doubt that they had any chance, because he had just killed a monster with his bare hands. Were they his equal? They saw that the great king was still standing motionless over the body of Chichek. He was covered in blood, and around his neck he had wound the hooks of the chains that he had torn from him. Michael continued to burst into laughter. He didn't expect the guy to win. He planned to have some fun, but Hank went and finished off the monster. Then the winged monster bent down to the guy and handed him something round and glowing. It was the promised reward, some kind of book with a coat of arms. The angel was about to fly away when he decided to praise the guy for his intelligence as a parting gift. He called him interesting and hoped that Hank would be more active in the future. David flew higher, addressing the suffering crowd. He praised them for their good work and also suggested that they continue the test. He explained that because they were time-synced with other areas, the goblins showed up later, so they sent everyone out on a 2-day trial run. The three of them, the angels, started a new process of rotation of the tower. Everyone understood that now another overlap of worlds would occur. There was a crack in the ground. A huge tree emerged from it. The whole process was accompanied by an explosion, which caused people and cars to fly away. Everyone started to run away. David stated that on the 3rd day of the tests, they would be waiting for them in a new arena, and also wished them to survive in the special zone. The city was becoming more and more of a wilderness. The mountains grew even higher. Now they were taller than the buildings. Hank decided to take refuge in the back of an overturned car. He did not understand how it happened that in just 3 days the world turned upside down. He realized that Gina was telling the truth. Many died during the trials, and everything that happens is a drama under the guise of a game. He didn't know why he was famous here and why everyone wanted to kill him. Hank also concluded that his ability is to absorb the elements he touches, so he decided not to attack just for them, but he needs skills to survive. Because everyone with whom he has any dealings wants to kill him, and all the chaos that is happening does not give him the moral right to surrender to them. The hero began to study the book given to him. It contained the secrets of fist and foot techniques. It was a reward for a special test. After reading it, he would be able to master one of them. As soon as the book was opened, everything around was illuminated by a blue flame. He thoughtfully read the text. The words from the book were imprinted all over his skin. His nose started bleeding. He wanted to know what that feeling was. After reading, he received the technique of extremely powerful foot. This technique is based on kicks. He wanted to test whether his level of physical fitness was enough to cope with it. Hank placed the spray can on the box and tried to kick it down, but he ended up missing and falling down, leaving the spray can standing. He didn't understand how to master this technique. The rumbling sound came from the stomach. The guy was very hungry. He joked that it was the hook's turn to be eaten. After some thought, the hero decided to try to absorb the hook as a new element, and then he received new knowledge. Pain maximization. Hank complained that every time he ate one, it smelled terrible. Then he decided to eat the rest of the hooks, thinking that they were quite suitable as food. The guy continued to complain about the taste, but in exchange for them, he received the 4th level of pain, and all the extra calories were automatically replaced with coins. Realizing how much money he now had, he decided that the taste could be tolerated. He continued to look at his indicators in the table. Looking out of the car, he thought it was quiet outside and hoped that nothing would happen if he got out, but he was already being watched. It was a new player, unknown to him before. He hit Hank from behind, but the guy was able to land without falling. The stranger said that he saw him in action. Looking at him carefully, the hero realized that he had already met him before. It was Todd. He had previously looked after him during the battle with the monster, the guy with the scar on his face. Hank didn't understand how Todd knew him. The player smiled. He was surprised that the guy didn't remember him and called him heartless, intending to strike. The great king repelled the attack with his new knowledge. But the man was surprised that he was using such a useless skill and wondered why he wasn't using the essence. They continued to fight. Hank mostly fought back, not attacking first, but his opponent was enjoying his superiority and using his advantages. Todd was disappointed that he did not get a worthy opponent, deciding that the protagonist's victory over the monsters was pure luck. He teased him, saying that the hero had forgotten how to fight once his memory was gone. But suddenly Hank was able to activate an extremely powerful foot. The man was still making fun of the king when suddenly a foot hit him in the face. He thought that Hank had changed his movements, but the guy was already flying towards him in a jump to deliver another blow. The activation of the technique was successful. The hero hastened to take advantage of the chance and struck in a new way, with the salamander's trident. After landing several punches in a row, Hank thought he had managed to defeat his opponent with his new power as he lay unconscious on the ground. But suddenly he came to his senses with a scream. The hero did not understand how he survived his attack, but the man admitted that he had an element of softening the blow. Todd also acknowledged the fact that he would have died without the advantage and praised his opponent for his resourcefulness. But Hank wanted to know the reason for the attack. It is unlikely that he wanted to get new elements. Most likely he wanted his second essence. The man wanted to eliminate him to become the strongest because he received a divine blessing, but at the same time he lost his memory. He could not allow Hank to covet this title again. Todd was confident that he would win this time. They started another battle, hitting each other one after another, Hank using his foot trick. The king then decided to scoop up sand and scatter it around to make his enemy lose track of him, who called him a coward for using dirty methods. Hank continued to methodically strike with the new skill, thus he was able to increase its level. With the last blow, the enemy stopped moving. The man was already lying covered in blood. He gathered his last strength to share that he was surprised how Hank could win without a weapon and a powerful element and without memories. Todd also received a blessing from those perfect beings interfering in their affairs at the beginning of the game. But Hank did not remember this. The enemy continued to bleed. While he laughed, he considered the guy a disgrace and that he was no longer quite the great king he used to be. He believed that Hank was not number one and not the strongest of the phenomenal nine, not a legendary warrior who rebelled against God, but just a shell of him. With his last strength, he wished the boy to perish and shouted that he had no chance in the battle against God and that next time he himself would become a great king. Hank was so enraged by the fact that he was the only one of all the participants who remembered absolutely nothing. Then he covered the dead man's body with a jacket. He felt in his jacket pocket a small map with an area circled in red on it. He decided that this was where the god the deceased had spoken of was located. Boiling with anger, the guy decided that he had to see for himself, or at least take a look at the one who was considered a perfect being. Hank went on a reconnaissance hike. He reached a huge waterfall. He knew that there must be a secret place behind it. Entering a certain temple, where strange figures were carved on the walls, he saw a bright light coming from a room behind the arch. Entering a huge hall, he noticed a throne at the end of the room. As soon as he asked out loud what was here, the fire in the wall lamps instantly lit up. Hank was startled by the sudden bright light. He saw that the throne had a forged figure of a goddess. He wondered who she was. A female figure with long hair was carved from stone, with two dragons with long tails rising above her shoulders and wrapping around her body. Then he received a message from the goddess Cassandra. Her voice was in his head. She asked him to choose her religion so that she could guide him. Hank had a feeling that something similar had happened before in his room. He tried to understand what was going on and how a stone statue could speak at all. She introduced herself as Cassandra, the queen of the fire of the underworld. She was the creator of this world, the ruler to whose worship and service he will dedicate his life, even if he previously followed other gods. She will illuminate him with the flame of mercy and give him strength if he swears allegiance to her. Cassandra ordered him to bow before her, kneel, and swear to serve her. But Hank doubted that he could gain power by becoming a believer. He didn't want to bow down to the one who suddenly forced everyone to participate in a deadly game that plays with people like chess pieces. The goddess wanted him to lead the people to kill the damned god, but Hank didn't want her blessing. He wasn't going to follow the god. Then she pinned him to the ground, and calling him a fool, ordered him to crawl on the floor until he grew faith in himself. Hank tried to understand that everything that was happening was the work of the gods. He also began to realize that everyone was fighting for them and killing each other too, and how, knowing this, he should want to convert to faith. Then, with great effort, he forced himself to his feet and roared that he would never submit to a god. Cassandra did not understand why he rejected her. She didn't like his words, and she decided to turn from stone to flesh. She was furious, and since he wanted to become a sacrificial lamb, she wanted to take his heart. With one movement of her finger, she began to rip his heart out of his chest. Hank screamed in pain, but then he was able to activate the conditions for activating his essence. She desperately wanted to understand why he didn't want to submit to her, why he didn't want to love God, why he didn't choose her religion. Cassandra was furious that he was mocking her, and for this sin she promised that he would die a painful death by burning in the fires of hell. Hank continued to scream in pain, his essence trying to turn in him. When the conditions for its activation were met, the goddess's powers were cancelled. She didn't understand how it could happen that her power disappeared. But then she was punished for breaking the rule and stripped of her status as a goddess. Her body began to break down. She screamed and asked why this was happening to her. How such a non-entity as Hank could have a divine essence. The goddess was disappearing. Her fountain was collapsing. The angels were screaming about the danger. They couldn't believe that this was happening and that the goddess Cassandra had disappeared. The new world continued to collapse. Mountains fell, and the angels feared that the earth would shake and the sky would split, and the power, having lost its master, would flare up and burn the world to the ground. They asked the angel of power how this could happen. He saw on his game ball that part of the earth had collapsed, and although it happened earlier than planned, there was nothing that could be done about it. Then he decided to try to fix the situation by imposing another world. The tower began to spin again, like everything around it. Michael decided to fly to the new world to check that everything was okay. He made sure that everything was neatly covered. Seeing a certain crater in the ground, he sensed that the strange boy was somewhere nearby. He assumed that the guy could have died during the explosion. Angel found a sword in the sand. He picked it up and examined it. He wished Hank had held on a little longer so he could have survived. He liked the guy even though he was lazy. Suddenly, Michael felt someone grab his leg. The man was badly burned and unrecognizable. It was Hank. He tried to tell him about it. The creature recognized the guy. He had no doubt about his remarkableness. He watched as he grabbed his artifact and said the code word. The hero began to recover. Then the angel decided to request the guy's status. He considered that for someone who survived the explosion, his indicators were too normal. Angel tried to find information on the hero. He did not understand whether there was a mistake. At this time, Hank fully recovered with even better physical indicators. Michael continued searching through the boy's achievements. Then he noticed that part of the goddess's essence had stuck to the hero's hand, but Hank pulled his hand away. The angel stated that Hank had grown up, and the part of the spirit that had stuck to him had saved him, as the goddess had quickly weakened and her part of the power had become attached to him. Then he gave him a special reward. He also explained that due to the unexpected new overlay of the world, the guy will have a hard time with his level. Hank was surprised by the reward in the form of an aromatic agent. Michael confirmed that this is a new test. The cube's action is limited, and when it expires, they will come and exchange the remaining volume for coins. The angel advised him to carefully put the reward in his pocket so that the smell would not evaporate, but the player did not understand why he needed it at all. Suddenly, a huge column of sand flew out of the ground and uninvited guests emerged, who, in the opinion of the entity, were quite expected. A huge worm with teeth and tentacles appeared. It quickly caught the running monsters and swallowed them. The angel wished Hank to have fun. Gina finally came into view. The girl in the ruins catches and kills green monsters, but receives from them only bone knives as an element. She holds a purple cube in her hand, just like Hank, and she understands that there are other ways to get great items, and the fastest way is to kill people. Suddenly, Gina hears someone talking to her from the destroyed building. The person is surprised that she is still collecting all sorts of junk. Frank runs out and unexpectedly for her puts his fist under her head. They had already met before. The guy noted that Gina had not changed at all. She was not thrilled to meet him, pushed his hand away, asked him to shut up, and advised him to keep his mouth shut if he was being attacked from behind. The muscular guy didn't understand why she was so serious. He put his arm around her shoulders and noted that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Frank thought that the girl was nervous in Hank's absence. He promised to take care of her if she was with him. He also offered her to join his party. He raised his upgraded hand and showed off his newly acquired level 1 item, a rusty knuckle duster. The girl sarcastically raises her thumb up and then runs it along her throat, hinting at her slit throat. The guy didn't expect her to react like that. He was expecting a warmer reception. He was so tense that even his veins were so tense that they were clearly visible through his skin. Frank did not give up and decided that he could take the girl into his team by force. He already raised his hand and swung at the girl. But Gina is not so simple. Her ability of a rubber body and quick reaction speed helped her to dodge the blow, but he was able to miss the swing of her leg into his jaw. The girl moved at the speed of light, so quickly that he did not have time to catch her with his gaze. He began to lose patience and joked that this was her way of flirting. She grabbed her arm just above his rusty knuckles and then did a body grab, wrapping her legs around him and then pinning the guy down on his back. Frank, although humiliated by the girl's victory, was still able to find the strength in himself to admit that she was a beauty. But the next moment he tried to pull his hand away and hit her. He threatened Gina that if she didn't stop, he would kill her. But the girl was not one to be timid. A couple of moves, and she had a chance to break the guy's leg. Realizing he was in a losing situation, Frank apologized, asked her to stop, and admitted his guilt and that he had acted childishly. A guy with rusty brass knuckles instead of hands decided to offer the girl his elements as his loss, since he didn't want to deal with her anymore. Frank extended his hand to Gina as a gesture of goodwill, but she wasn't going to give up halfway. Her glowing red eyes proved it. She landed several lethal blows. Having won the battle, she took her loot in the form of brass knuckles and immediately put them on her fingers. The girl went in search of Hank. Stepping out into the open street, she encountered a white-haired man in an interesting suit surrounded by his comrades. The guy applauded her victory. Gina looked at him with a look full of hatred. She recognized in him an acquaintance named Julian. She asked if he wanted to have some fun. The guy noticed that the heroine was not happy with his appearance. He asked her to soften because he did not come to fight with her. Julian continued to gather his team. She saw his armed henchmen as well as a truck at their disposal, but Gina did not want to be with them. The man was sure that Hank was dead, and if he were alive, he would have known about it. But he hinted that players with two essences disappear without a trace, and they always need to be prepared. He believed that without memory, the boy would not be able to survive the trials. Even though he was once called a great king, at the moment, he was most likely dead. Julian offered the girl cooperation. He considered himself the most suitable candidate for the role of ruler of humanity. Gina was ready to smash everything around her with rage, but not wanting to kill the guy, she picked up maximum speed and ran away, creating a deep rut of stones and sand behind her. The girl ran wherever her eyes looked. She stopped at the top of a cliff and looked around at the surrounding area of similar cliffs and sand. Gina believed that it didn't matter what Hank was like before, because the strong should protect the weak, and their past and present were very different. She understood that he didn't remember anything about this world and was afraid for his life, but she also felt that she needed to pull herself together and not give in. The girl could barely hold back her tears. She decided to collect as many elements as possible before meeting her lover, so that it would be easier for them to fight in the future. Gina was about to fight the giant worm with teeth. She had already activated her rusty brass knuckles and rushed straight to the open mouth of the monster. She felt that the guy was alive and tried to fight for him. At that time, Hank climbed to the bottom of a remote cave. He sat in a not very comfortable position and with his eyes closed, trying to recover from the explosion. Carl was watching him from above, holding a large boulder in his hands and preparing to destroy his opponent. Wanting to kill the guy, he threw the stone right at the unsuspecting Hank. The hero noticed that some object was flying at him. He stood up abruptly and put his hand under the stone. From the force, it broke into many small pieces. Hank looked up and noticed Carl watching him. He didn't expect to be caught red-handed, so he immediately started running away. He immediately hurried to the top, jumping along the steep cliff. Hank finally reached the top, but it was too late. Carl had caught a cold, but he left his clothes and bag, which was in the hero's favor. Suddenly hearing someone talking, he decided to see who was coming. The strangers were discussing the shelter and thought that they had found the ideal place. It was Thor, Diana, and Becca. They were languishing from the heat and wanted to drink water as soon as possible, but their supplies had long since run out. Thor was indignant that he had been given the responsibility of carrying everyone's things, while Diana was only responsible for water, but they had run out of that too. To which Becca rightly pointed out that no one forced him to join their duet, so why does he continue to complain about unfairness? The girl began to talk about a portable altar that gives the ability only to the first 3 believers. They decided to cooperate to awaken the god and remain together until they find a victim. She told him that since Thor didn't trust them, then he should have gone there alone. He was already an adult and should understand that he should be responsible for his words. The guy didn't understand why he had to listen to her reproaches, but at that moment the blonde asked them to shut up. She pulled her long ears out from behind her hair. The guys fell silent, trying to understand what she was planning, but Diana decided to activate her essence, so she found out that someone was watching them. The beauty realized that there was someone nearby. She told the others about it, but unfortunately, She could not determine where exactly. She took out a bottle of water and handed it to Becca to drink. Thor was a little offended by the deception. He was told that there was no water left. The girl in the red cape activated her essence. She maximized her sense of smell by using the body's water. Becca tried to smell the observer. It didn't take her long, even though the smell was unfamiliar to her. Soon she pointed to the top of the cliff and pointed her finger. Thor was immediately glad that he had found the victim at the most opportune time. He decided to go in search of her and asked the girls to prepare the altar. Diana wasn't sure if he should go to the rock right away. She decided to try her luck again by activating the search, but failed again. She asked him not to rush, but Thor was not one to be timid and did not understand what he had to be afraid of. But the next second, Hank jumped out at them and hit the guy on the head. The man didn't expect an attack from behind. He hit the ground with all his might, and then missed another fashionable blow from the hero. A purple cube fell out of Hank's pants pocket. A reward for surviving the explosion. He picked it up. The girls immediately recognized him as the Great King. Diana was sure he had lost his memory. She saw him put the cube in the back pocket of his pants. She wanted to know if he wanted to take their cube or maybe the coins. The blonde was clearly afraid. She was sweating all over. The girl understood that there was no point in them measuring their strength with him. Becca decided to quickly get the altar out of her bag. Diana wanted to give it to Hank, hoping that then they could be saved. But she did not take out the altar to give it to the hero. She was afraid that her friend would give it to him. So she got ahead of the events and stuck her knife into Diana's side. The blonde did not expect such an act from her ally. She was bleeding not only from the wound, but also from the mouth. She asked to let her go and accused Becca of misunderstanding. But the red coat did not allow the girl to move. She desperately wanted to receive God's blessing. So she finished Diana off to death. Hank had no idea what this unexpected meeting would lead to. And now he was watching as the blonde's head smashed against the altar and her blood flowed down it. The magical altar, having received enough blood from the victim, lit up with a bright purple flame. Becca was not going to give in to anyone. Then the sides of the altar opened up and a huge figure in metal armor began to appear from there. It was the god Kent. He wanted to know if the girl was a believer, eager to obtain the power of his body. Becca was delighted with the appearance of the god. She confirmed his suspicions. Then he invited her to get up and climb inside his armor. She was very happy. But she was immediately warned that not all activation conditions were met. Kent was disappointed by the girl's weakness. He released iron spikes and demanded that she give up her flesh and blood to become his food. Becca tried to get out of the iron trap. She didn't want to become someone's food because she had already given the victim's blood and didn't know that there were any other hidden conditions. The thorns were getting tighter and tighter. They were already starting to pierce her skin. The girl was screaming for help. She was asking Hank to save her. But before the guy had time to come to his senses, the girl's body burst inside the god's suit. Then Hank decided to open the board of the enemy's capabilities, but most of them were unknown. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the angel Michael appeared. He looked at the table of God's skills and assumed that the guy was finished. Hank understood that his chances of winning were getting smaller. Kent's battle armor expertly swung his weapon, ready to pierce anyone with it. Michael was excited about the prospect of a spectacular battle, and he noticed that unlike Tsichek, Kent was a type of fighting technique that had dispassionate attacks and a complete lack of intelligence. The guy already had his fists ready. He didn't like the angel's mood, which he was trying to infect Hank with. He asked him to either help or shut up. The winged creature continued to sneer at the hero, but eventually decided to help. He wanted to check on the cube how many the hero had killed. Michael continued to call people inferior creatures, ready to kill each other for profit, while Hank noticed another cube lying next to Diana's body. The guy rushed with all his might after the cube, discouraging the angel. He had 5 seconds left before the cube's effect ended, and he, dodging the god's blows, managed to grab it at the last moment. The angel raised the old cube above his head, noting the speed of the protagonist. He had almost lost hope for the guy. Hank was still on guard, his hands still in fists. He didn't understand why Michael enjoyed watching him fight for his life. He opened the cube's board and found out that he was in first place in the area, and the volume was astronomically large, and he also received a bonus as a reward. But the hero understood that he had a more difficult task ahead of him. Namely, defeating another god. Their strength was unequal, so the guy decided to spend the coins on improving his abilities and body. The battle began in an instant. The battle armor made the move first. Hank parried the blows until he activated his super strong foot. Unfortunately, the armor was very strong and his blows did not have much effect on Kent, although the attack worked great. Even the super strong attack of the first-level Salamander Trident did not harm the god in any way. Only faint smoke from the fire was visible, but metal does not burn. But the armor was not going to give up. He grabbed Hank and threw him to the ground, then swung his sword arm, but the guy dodged. Then the hero grabbed his hand and activated his essence taste of steel. As soon as he said the code word, he was able to tear off his opponent's arm, from which a liquid similar to blood flowed. Hank didn't understand how it happened that the severed arm was considered a new element of his abilities, because last time it was different. Pleased with this development, he decided to invest all the remaining coins into upgrading his abilities and hoped that he would be able to touch the armor again. But the guy had a worthy opponent. He continued to swing his sword, and Hank tried to dodge them, noticing that the attack radius had become larger. He understood that it would now be much more difficult to close the distance. He tried to move actively, but the god was much faster, and at one point the blade cut off the guy's hand. Michael watched the battle and was very impressed by how they fought. Even though Hank was able to cut off the god's hand, he could have easily won without it. The guy was already very exhausted, plus the pain from the severed arm was making the test uncomfortable. Hank believed that the man's chances of success were very small. The angel watched them from above, and David suddenly joined him. Surprised to see the battle armor, he thought that he could not be defeated. Raphael joined them. They offered Michael to stop watching this battle and join them. They were able to find an amazing fighter. This new player was able to obtain a piece of armor that protects his hand, and he is also the leader in the kill rankings. But Michael was not at all interested in listening to their beliefs, but he wished them to have fun, and he himself refused. The other angels were shocked by what they heard. He continued to watch Hank's battle against God. He had become attached to the guy and wanted to see his death with his own eyes. Hank meanwhile stood and held his wound. Blood continued to flow from his hand. He was very tense and could not normally fight off Kent's attacks, but only dodge them. The hero understood that he could not win while so much blood was flowing out of him. He longed to be healed by his essence as soon as possible. Having accidentally felt an object in the sand, he touched it and was able to find out that it was an ancient bracelet. But it was not enough for the treatment. Something more substantial was needed. It took the guy a lot of effort to implement his plan. He picked up speed to confuse his opponent. He held the bracelet in his teeth and grabbed his severed hand. But Hank didn't foresee that God was very fast himself, and in an instant he found himself behind the guy and with a light movement of his ball cut off his other hand. The plan could still be prevented from happening. Even with his hands cut off, he called the monster and waited for it to step on his flesh to call out the code word to activate it. As soon as he said it, there was an explosion of light and Hank's arms immediately grew back, while the god's leg was destroyed. Hank decided to catch the enemy's moment of weakness. He quickly touched his armor with both hands. The guy was confident in his victory. Since his ability is to absorb elements that he touches with his hand, thanks to the bracelet he was able to heal the wound on his cheek, but he was not going to stop and wanted to completely absorb all of Kent's flesh. The guy held the god by the sword with one hand and by the head with the other. He shouted a code word and the armor in these places began to slowly split into atoms until it completely disappeared. Michael, who was watching the action, was amazed at the hero's talent. He doubted that Hank would be able to defeat such a strong opponent. The remaining metal part of the god fell to the ground, and from the destroyed head appeared the body. Everything around was covered in his blood. Kent's essence made contact with the guy. He showed favor and continued to repeat very well right inside Hank's head, who did not understand whose voice it was. Suddenly, the battle armor jumped up sharply and suddenly attacked the hero again. Hank was able to grab onto its remaining limbs. The guy decided not to be so kind anymore and declared that he would then eat the god whole down to the last cell. But as soon as he said the code word, what happened was not what he expected. His ability didn't work because the divine power canceled out the effect of the essence and the item that softened the blows. Despite this unfortunate situation for him, Hank still did not give up and continued to strike, tearing off the god's second leg and then decapitating him. With a strange hissing sound, the essence of God began to emerge from the pool of blood. It was a girl in a red dress and with a terrifying smile. She smiled, admired the guy's abilities, and said that the last attack was very painful for her. Then she snapped her fingers. In an instant, Hank could no longer move. Obviously, it was the work of the second essence of the battle armor. The deity demanded the guy to bow before it. The deity demanded an oath of allegiance, as well as giving him the guy's body and soul, and also demanded to love him. The message limit was exceeded, and sending messages became temporarily unavailable. It turned out that it was Michael who stopped her from sending Hank messages. Once she realized that he was the one to blame for this, she hurt him and demanded that he not interfere with her. The angel could not cope with her strength and began to fall to the ground. He hit hard, but the girl continued to mock him, promising to break his spine. Michael continued to lie there, unable to move, begging her for mercy and also trying to convince her that it was not him. But the system's decision. Hank decided to turn her attention to himself. He asked if she wanted to talk, and as soon as she fixed her gaze on him, he realized that she understood him and that she was not mute at all. Kent let go of the angel and then asked the guy to play with her. Hank didn't understand what she was talking about. He didn't expect such an answer. God declared that she liked the hero very much. She flew very close to him and lifted his chin with her finger. Michael was trying to catch his breath after the unexpected attack of the battle armor entity. He was surprised that she liked the guy and suggested that perhaps she was thinking of replacing the apostle. She promised that Hank would become stronger than the others, and if her sympathy was mutual, then she would be able to give him the ability to destroy this entire world. Michael found a way to fly up. He could not understand that such a monster as Kent could be summoned from above. He tried to quickly report this to the Angel of Power. The entity heard the angel's thoughts, and using its powers, it threw him to the ground again. He was bleeding from the mouth. The girl ordered him not to move. She then turned her attention back to Hank. She suggested that he would be better than the current apostle and would be able to amuse him. The guy said that he didn't want it. Then she smiled at him, not believing his words. She asked him again if she had misheard that he didn't want to become an apostle. She stated that she did not believe the words of a god like him. Michael was still pinned to the ground. He did not understand why the guy would refuse such an offer. Then the entity flew up again. It had already begun to gather the ball of its power in its hand and was preparing to kill the main character. Hank told her that the goddess Cassandra had also promised to grant him powers if he bowed before her. He no longer wanted to hear this nonsense. He felt anger toward such gods, perhaps because he had killed one of them in his past life. But he knew that she could not kill him due to the rules of the system. As he continued speaking, he called the girl impudent and spoiled, and he had no intention of dedicating his life to such a frivolous creature as she. Hank declared that he did not accept Kent as a god. Then she flew up to him again and took his head in her palms from above, repeating her sympathy again. Then she looked at him upside down, eye to eye, her eyes glowing yellow. She wanted to make him her own. The girl sat on top of Hank's shoulders, wrapping her legs around his neck. She held her fingers to his temples, applying pressure. He shuddered. She knew that God shouldn't interfere with the affairs of non-believers and those who didn't pray to him. But before the system made a decision, she could invade his mind, or his head could just explode. The battle armor continued to burst into laughter. It was funny to her that the guy was shaking like a leaf, threatening that he would stop breathing now. Kent wanted to know if he thought she was horrible, squeezing him so tightly that he couldn't move. The girl thought that only an idiot would be rude and refuse her. She let go of his head, but left a stigma on his face. The kiss of the god of war, the sign of a true god. With her, he would never be able to forget about her. Having finished her business and decided to leave, her body began to be covered with large spherical ulcers. She did not say goodbye. Then the entity's business exploded and covered everything around with blood. The guy was finally able to exhale. He was barely standing, covered in blood after the explosion of the body. Hank was glad that she freed him from the grip. Michael was still lying on the ground, slowly coming to his senses after the weakening of the god's spell. He was glad that the danger had passed, and he was now free. The hero approached the remaining armor. He tried to absorb their power, but the system gave an error. But he had no doubt that he would not be able to eat them. Since everything worked out this way, Hank decided to look into the status table and figure out the reward in the form of a ticket with a chest, ordering the element to be issued. The angel was finally able to stand up. He regretted that he had started all this. The hero called out to him and said that he had already saved his life twice. Hank hinted that it would be nice to pay for the service rendered, showing him a ticket with a chest. The winged creature was clearly not happy with the blackmail. He flew up above the guy and screamed that this was not funny at all. No lower creature would even think of wanting to devour an angel. The hero was a little deafened by such loud screams, so he decided to hit the angel in the side and he curled up on the ground in pain. Hank went back to the ticket. He wanted to tear it to activate it, but he wasn't sure if it would work. But immediately after the tear, a bright blue light appeared. From the emerging whirlwind of light, a certain person began to appear. It was a middle-aged man, with a mustache and in the strange attire of a wanderer. On his back, he had a huge backpack. Fletcher tried to see where his client was. Noticing Hank covered in blood, he asked how he was feeling. The guy could barely stand on his feet. Then the man handed the hero a small vessel and, apologizing, offered him to use it. There was a lot of water in the wineskin, although it was not very heavy. Hank immediately opened the bottle and without hesitation began to shower. He happily washed off the blood, sweat, and dirt, and then was able to breathe a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, Fletcher decided to unpack his backpack, which contained a rack with a huge number of different bladed weapons. The man greeted the customer again. He is a peddler, travels the world, and offers only first-class goods. He put his arm around the hero, suggesting that he first look around a bit while he rested a bit after the journey. Hank approached the stand and was a little surprised by the prices of some of the goods. Fletcher asked if this was the first time he had used the service of a salesman. Having heard a positive answer, he decided to tell the guy about the ticket he used. It allows you to call a representative of the trading company at any time. The ticket is not so easy to get. He offered Hank to buy the ticket at a special price of 500 coins. But at the guy's surprised face, he decided to bargain down to 200. The hero checked his coin balance. He had more than 40,000 in his account, and he honestly told Fletcher about it. The man was very shocked to hear that the guy had no money. He lamented that recently there had been very tough competition between the shops. After so much time, he hoped that a worthy client had finally appeared, but he was called just to look and not buy anything. Hank didn't understand why the merchant was reacting like that. He had money, after all. But Fletcher laughed. He didn't care. To him, the guy was a beggar. The guy didn't expect that after tearing up the ticket, an arms dealer would come to him, so it turned out that he really had used the call in vain. The seller was very interested in finding out how Hank got the ticket in the first place, and learned that it was given to him as a special reward for the Cube Challenge. Once Fletcher learned the truth, he realized that he should have guessed earlier because the guy didn't even know what the ticket was for. Hank made excuses that he had been summoned to a world where enlightenment had just begun, and the salesman was surprised that he didn't read about safety precautions before using something. The guy admitted that he was not one of those who would get acquainted with such things, and it turned out that he did not even know what Fletcher was selling. It turned out that the man sells various items from the second class and above. He assured the guy of the excellent quality of his goods, so the client should be appropriate. He complained that because of this call, an important deal had fallen through for him and he could not remain calm. The merchant began to collect his things. Hank decided to get the flask and drink some water, but Fletcher was completely disappointed with such a customer and demanded to return it since it was not a gift. The hero was also upset that the reward was useless to him, and in anger he kicked the god's armor which remained lying on the sand. The merchant immediately noticed this artifact. His eyes lit up with an irresistible desire to get his hands on the valuable metal. Fletcher expressed curiosity about how exactly Hank planned to dispose of this piece of trash. The guy honestly answered that he was not sure, since the essence did not work on him. The man tried to beg for the armor to be disposed of under the pretext of harming the environment, but the guy refused. Then he immediately changed his behavior, immediately apologized to the hero for his rudeness, and then offered to buy them out at a high price. He offered the guy 200,000 coins and 2 tickets to call his younger colleagues and a big discount if he bought something from them. Seeing that Hank was not yet willing to sell, he said that he would not let the boy go anywhere until he sold them to him, then offered to exchange them for his goods. He offered various goods, one more expensive than the other. A beautiful blade with a blue glow, a knuckle duster with a sharp blade, or protective gloves. Fletcher was eager to make the exchange as soon as possible, but the guy, sensing a deception, decided to start bargaining with 1,000,000 coins. The man was very upset when he heard such a large sum. He was unhappy that the guy had taken him for an ignoramus in order to extort exorbitant amounts from him. Suddenly, an angel flew out of nowhere. The merchant was very scared by his appearance, but Hank was unhappy that he visited him again. Michael called the hero a moron. He held him accountable for his words about saving his life, but the guy was unwavering. The winged creature wanted to unleash all his anger on them, but Hank chuckled at the fact that the angel could not accept the truth, could not raise his head in the presence of God, and now wanted revenge. He didn't like the guy's words, and then he decided to hit the guy behind whom the merchant was hiding. A ring of flame formed around them. But Michael decided not to take things to the extreme. So his hand stopped next to the guy's face. He warned that next time he would not spare him for such words. The angel had never been so angry before. He warned the boy once again that even this armor would not be able to save him next time, and then flew away. Hank wasn't quite sure why the creature had mentioned armor, but he decided to try it on, even though he was sure it was female. Simply by pressing the metal against his naked body, they immediately began to transform to his figure, quickly taking the required size. The merchant was very upset when he realized that he would not get the rare element, and then noticed that his entire shop was destroyed. Fletcher cried as he realized that all his goods had turned into junk, holding the broken staff in his hands. He understood that now he would not be able to sell all these things. Hank noticed a green bundle that looked like a mattress, and although he didn't know what he wanted it for, he offered to buy it for cheap. The seller tried to control himself, but he decided that the guy had teamed up with the angel to rob him. He thought that this way he would go broke. Fletcher agreed to give the guy the mattress at a discount, but the hero bargained and asked for clothes, water, and food in addition. Having tried on the outfit, the guy was not particularly delighted, and the merchant, having already opened the portal for movement, threw curses in his direction as a farewell. The main character sincerely did not understand how one could be a merchant with such a disgusting attitude towards clients. He picked up the drop ticket to call another seller, took his newly purchased things and got ready to go, but noticed Diana's lying body. Deciding to stay a little longer, he buried the bodies in graves and covered them with stones, marking the burial sites with sticks. Since it was already deep night outside, Hank stayed in the cave. He lit a candle and began to examine the mattress he had bought in a bundle. But there were no instructions for it. After unpacking the product, which looked like a regular sleeping bag, he found out that it was damaged and most of its functions were not usable. Hank was already falling asleep sitting up, so he decided to wrap himself in his sleeping bag when suddenly he was awakened by someone's voice, noting the guy's tired appearance. He was afraid that God had contacted them again, which is why he couldn't sleep. But it was Sonia. She promised to calm his body and mind. Meanwhile, in another place, the same player with armor protecting his hand was killing everyone in a row. He caused a whole massacre and waited for the great king to appear before him. Hank was sleeping soundly in his sleeping bag. Opening his eyes, he did not understand where he was. He fell asleep in a cave and woke up already indoors. Opposite him sat Michael. It was he who moved the guy to a new place. It was already the 8th day of enlightenment. Then he called him to follow him. Going outside, the hero heard some noise. The angel explained that these were the sounds of the game. While he was sleeping, the tournament between the zones had already begun to come to an end. He also said that the winner would receive a great fence, but if he was afraid of dying, he could refuse to participate. Approaching the arena where Kurt stood, he had already managed to kill everyone who agreed to fight him. The rest retreated. The only one remaining was Hank, so the final fight could have been between them. But the hero was dumbfounded by the participants' cruelty. He waved his huge, customized hand, destroying everything in his path. Kurt was eager to fight the Great King. He invited him to join the fight. He wanted to prove his strength and abilities by killing the guy. Hank decided to stretch his muscles a little while simultaneously requesting status. He spent coins to improve his strength and physical strength indicators. Michael was surprised that the boy was not scared, but he was scared. But he did not want to give up, deciding that it was better to die in battle. The hero climbed into the arena. They remained there alone. The spectators took their seats. Kurt believed that Hank's very existence was an obstacle for him to become the new Great King. But the main character did not understand everyone's thirst to become a king. Why in the new crazy world they only want to get this title? Because by cooperating, they could return to their world. The man interpreted these words in his own way. He decided that the guy had become a coward. And in this world, strength is the main thing. The law of natural selection operates here. Kurt activated his essence, gravitational pressure, and tried to destroy the stage. Hank barely managed to jump up so as not to be hit. The hero assumed that his essence had distorted the earth, but the man raised his hand up and activated his superpower. It consisted of the ability to attract any objects, including people. Hank could not resist this. He obediently flew towards him. Touching Kurt's huge hand, the boy tried to strike with his signature salamander trident, but Kurt blocked it with his right hand. Hank tried to kick him again, but his opponent grabbed his foot and threw him with all his might into the fence around the arena. The crazy participant got really angry. He turned on all the power of his being and began to destroy the arena. People started screaming. They all flew towards the player, and he caught them and crushed them with his huge hand. Kurt was furious that all the people were bothering him. He drove them away and pushed them away. Many died from one blow from him, but he was looking for Hank, who jumped out at him. The guy managed to hit the madman in the face, which sent him into a rage. He picked up speed and was already preparing to deal the fatal blow to the hero. But he was ready, and, dodging the hand, he delivered another powerful kick to his jaw, knocking out several teeth. The god of war, Mark, was disappointed by the impotence of Kurt, who believed in him. He wanted to leave him, but the guy resisted as best he could. Hank was very happy that he was finally able to find the player's weak spot, and he managed to break through it. He had no doubt in his abilities. But the next moment, he missed a powerful blow. The guy had blood spurting from his mouth. The god of war was still disappointed with Kurt. Lightning flashed in the sky. Then a pillar of light struck the center of the arena right at the madman. Hank did not understand what was happening. The man continued to beg God to give him another chance. But Mark was adamant and initiated the transfer of the soul into the body of the believer. The god moved into Kurt's hand. An eye and a mouth appeared on the palm. He claimed that the man was not good enough even with his blessing. Hank was still looking at the living palm, which expressed a desire to personally crush the guy, offering to take it as an honor. The hero was very unhappy that another deity appeared before him, descending from heaven and breaking the rules. Michael had been watching what was happening all this time. He himself did not understand how a god who had forced people to participate in enlightenment had the right to directly intervene in the battle. Mark stated that God was free to use the body of a believer who knelt before him at his own discretion, and he also noticed a mark of the god Kent on his cheek. The creature struck the hero again, causing blood to spurt from his mouth again. Then he threw the guy to the ground with force. Mark couldn't call his supporter to lose to someone like Hank, so she jumped on top of the guy and slammed him into the asphalt. Suddenly, his huge hands split into many ribbons. It was almost impossible to avoid their blows. The hero continued to receive blow after blow. After dozens of attacks, he pinned the guy deep underground. He was barely alive, bleeding. Mark laughed that a youth with such pathetic abilities dared to challenge him. But the great hero was still conscious. Although he felt extremely bad, he replied that he was curious to measure his strength with a god. But he turned out to be weak because he was still alive. The speaking palm lifted Hank's head. He realized the reason Kent had chosen him. Perhaps it was because he had a better body. He offered the boy a deal. He would give him a chance to survive if he cut off the symbol of the battle armor from his cheek, and then bowed down before him and receive all the power of his body. Hank was already very tired of hearing the same nonsense about faith and worship from the gods. He saw no point in their blessing. By advising the gods not to look down on people, he only made Mark even more angry. He heard the mockery of himself in his words, so he decided to crush the guy with the force of his body. Suddenly, the hand rested against the madman's fist. It was Kent in female guise. She did not allow the god of war to touch her marked one. She lifted Hank's head and kissed him on the lips, not only healing him but awakening his powers, her power flying into his mouth. Battle Armor called this guy his special baby because she likes him, and the hero has changed a lot. He began to look as crazy as she is. The god of war was very angry at her interference, but she put him in his place, stating that he was the one who got into the human fight in the first place. Kent, in the guise of Hank, slowly grabbed the hands of Mark's body, wondering why the battle armor had so greatly altered the body of its believer. He was angry with such a question. He did not need moral instructions from her, because she herself had forcibly captured a man who did not believe her. Then Hank suddenly grabbed Kurt's hand and kicked him a few times. He wanted the mad god to calm down a little this way. But he had no intention of giving up and missing his chance to harm his enemy. Despite the fact that he only had an arm, he continued to stand. God wanted to make Kent cry, but he challenged him, then decided that they should even the odds since he had completely taken over Kurt's body. The deity infused the spirit of the puppeteer into the hero, and then began to use a crazy martial arts dance in battle with the enemy. After several excellent attacks, Hank was able to lay the guy's body on the ground. The god was confident that he had defeated the enemy and, putting his foot on his head, triumphed. Although Kurt looked defeated, the god of war had not yet disappeared. He rose again and attacked the hero, but he was able to parry the blows and then completely tore his arm from his body and threw it far away. The angel, as always, flew at a distance and watched the struggle of two gods who had possessed people. He considered them to be simple-minded madmen, and he was curious as to why they had arranged all this right now. Hank noticed the watching winged creatures and headed towards them, which made the angels very nervous. God was tired of their rules. He wanted to keep the guy's body for himself. He grabbed Michael by the face, not giving him a chance to answer, saying how he wanted to crush them all at once. He wanted to know why he was constantly hanging around the hero. Kurt was going to leave before Hank woke up. He asked the angel to take care of his pet and also to protect him from anyone who wanted to attack. The deity turned and looked towards the tower. He was addressing the angel of power, who, in his opinion, saw nothing beyond his rules. The hero's body tried to expel the evil spirits from itself. The god realized that time was up and he could no longer hold out in it, also noting that the guy had excellent willpower. Michael was overjoyed, as were the rest of the angels. They all breathed a sigh of relief that Kent was gone. He wondered why he was the one who suffered every time. Hank was lying on the ground. He was in pain. Every cell of his body was twisted in convulsions. After the battle, the guy unlocked new secret fighting techniques. The angel assumed that because the hero had unwillingly activated the divine technique without having the required level of ability, all of his muscles were torn apart. He lay on the ground, completely unconscious, his entire body covered in blood and bruises, while the people around him wondered if they could kill him. But they heard that the deity ordered Michael to protect the boy. He continued to stand over his body and wait for him to finally wake up after everything that happened. David placed his angelic body on the pedestal. He solemnly announced the end of the tournament, as well as the completion of the tests for all zones. But from that moment the game began. He advised not to lose vigilance and wished everyone to cope with the next test. Raphael flew up to Michael, who was still standing next to the main character. He asked him about his future plans, offering to just leave the guy here and fly away. But the defender drove his colleague away. He was not in the mood to talk to him. He wanted to stay and watch Hank until he woke up. He woke up in his sleeping bag. Everything still hurt, and the recent events made themselves known immediately. The angel was glad that the hero had awakened. At that very moment, the winged creature yelled at the guy for sleeping for too long and forced him to get up. Hank thought that he lost consciousness only for a moment. He wanted to know where all his things were, but Michael didn't bother to take them with him. The angel complained that he had wasted several days looking after him. It turned out that he slept for 4 days, during which time the world was rebuilt, and this was no longer the place where the guy had previously undergone trials. The borders dividing the world into 2 areas were no longer there. Hank did not understand what borders were being talked about. They were located on the top of a new cliff. All the people who had 2 essences, as well as those who were excessively cruel during the Enlightenment, were divided according to their strengths into different groups and began to fight with each other. The sorting was almost complete. The new test was ready and already waiting for the participants. There was half an hour left before the start. Michael reproached the guy for sleeping for so long, but Hank thought that it was even better that way. Otherwise, what would he have been doing all this time? The angel believed that the guy had completely lost his conscience. Then he decided to give him a reward for his previous victory in the battle with God. Feathers were falling from the sky again. Hank decided to check his status. He noticed that all indicators had increased. Compared to the time when the abilities were weaker, now even the body became lighter. After looking at what kind of reward he received, he learned that this compass points to a person with similar abilities or desires as the owner. There was no reaction yet. The guy began to think about the question of his desires. Before he was interested in money, career, and popularity. Now none of this mattered. He wants to meet Gina. Hank stood on the very edge of the cliff. He remembered his girl, but soon forced himself to stop reflecting. He needed to move forward. He decided not to retreat even a step. No matter what the obstacles and no matter what the main test, he was ready for anything. Activating his new divine technique, an extremely powerful foot, he descended the cliff in short jumps until he landed neatly at the bottom. The guy was happy to feel the full power of his physical abilities. He never ceased to be amazed by such incredible changes. Checking the compass again, which was not responding, Hank considered whether he should go to the Black Tower. He could lose his way and get lost, so he hoped to find animal trails or traces of other people. Hank continued to descend the mountains. He noticed a small hole in the ground that was a different color from the sand. He assumed it might be an animal's footprint, but as soon as he approached it, a giant crab jumped out of the hole. At first, they froze. waiting for a reaction from each other. But a moment later, the crab chased the guy, who ran as fast as he could, but they had a serious difference in size and number of legs. The guy decided to try to turn around the rock and hide behind it, but the huge animal simply destroyed the hero's shelter, which scared him a lot. Hank didn't understand. How could he deal with the crab? It wasn't an element, so all he could do was run and hide. At some point, the great king decided that the arthropod had decided to give up the search and left, but its shell was still sticking out of the hole in the ground. He felt that this crab was too big for a representative of its species, so he decided to avoid the strangely colored rocks. Just as the guy exhaled from the recent danger, he was suddenly grabbed by the claws of a huge red bird, similar to an exotic parrot. He wanted to eat them, but unfortunately it was impossible for his abilities, so he had to use a kick to get the bird to free him. But as soon as the parrot released Hank onto the ground, his leg was immediately grabbed by the tongue of a huge lizard, and with its long tongue it lifted the guy into the air. He got tired of getting into such troubles. He became very angry and hit the animal with his powerful kick, thereby killing it. Hank didn't understand why the current world belonged to monsters. He had to kill a crab, a bird, and a lizard to save himself, but he couldn't get any elements from them. Checking the compass, which was still inactive, he tried to figure out where to go next. This feeling of being lost terrified him. The guy decided to take a little rest nearby. His shoulder was hurting. He was constantly rubbing it, and besides, he was at a loss from the new world. Hank's stigma suddenly lit up. Kent decided to give him an excellent remedy for restoring strength, taking which he could immediately renew his energy. He took a closer look at the contents of the jar and noticed little faces there. The guy decided to throw the bottle away and said that he would not talk to him anymore. Hank lay in the sun and thought about how his past life seemed like some kind of distant mirage. He couldn't believe that all the daily responsibilities would become routine. The guy was holding on with his last moral strength. He stood up and shouted loudly. He wanted the old world to return as quickly as possible. His screams woke up the dozing crab. Hank was scared when he saw him coming out from around the corner, but in the end, everything worked out. As suddenly a dull thud began to come from his pocket, he took out his compass, which finally found its direction. Hank decided that this was a reaction to his desire, and perhaps what he wanted was at the end of the beam. The hero descended from another mountain. He followed the directions of the compass, and the countdown to the start of the main test began. A couple of minutes remained. Suddenly he noticed that there were several people standing in one of the caves. He assumed that they were all from the same team, hiding. He decided to eavesdrop on their conversations. One of them warned his fellow tribesmen about the danger of entering the cave, since everyone who had tried before was already dead. But before he could finish speaking, he got hit in the face with a bat. Warren asked him not to point fingers at him. He considered them useless people, and also that they were alive thanks to Gina's friend, Julian. They continued to stand in front of the entrance to the huge dark cave and argue about whether they should go inside for the most valuable element. Time was running out. The man with the bat held it next to the other man's face. He was sure that he and his essence would be able to get out when the tests began, but he was not sure about the others. Deciding to leave one man on guard, they gave him something like a radio and asked him to report from time to time on what was happening. The rest moved inside the cave. Warren felt that someone was watching them. He asked the man not to hide. Hank came out of the bushes. He said that he was not going to fight. As soon as the man saw the boy, he immediately recognized him as the Great King. He was glad that the hero survived the test and did not expect to meet him in such a place. But in reality, he was happy for the opportunity to attack and kill Hank, immediately throwing a punch towards the guy, but he was able to dodge it. Warren continued to attack. He admitted that he also survived, and his memories were still with him. Having hit the hero, he was pleased. Hank saw an opportunity to grab onto the enemy's metal bat. He wanted to eat it using the code word, but his plan was unsuccessful as the man knew about another entity. The hero then decided to use his ability to kick, but Warren got ahead of him, using his spider leg's essence, and he was able to climb onto Hank's leg. Then the main character missed another blow. He was forced to spit out the blood that had accumulated in his mouth. The enemy explained that his essence allows him to walk anywhere, even on the surface of the water. There was less and less time left before the test began. The counter was rushing the man. He was trying to finish his business with the king as quickly as possible. Warren sped around Hank, deciding to use the method of striking from the shadows. But the guy managed to grab his hand and did not let go. He tried to break free from the tenacious trap, continuing to strike the hero's face, but he did not release the grip. There were only a few seconds left before the test. The countdown was completed, the commandment was activated, the ban on the desert ecosystem was completely lifted, and the locked objects were released. The enemy warned that they should run away from here. But immediately after these words, a shadow appeared, which pierced the man through and through, so that blood spurted from every possible crack. Hank saw this monster. It was much larger than all the previous ones. Its body looked like an elongated pumpkin, its eyes were black, and on its head there were sharp spikes, on one of which Warren's body was hanging. The hero clearly understood that he should run as fast as he could and hide in a secluded place. Deciding that the cave would be perfect, he hid behind its wall. Suddenly, he heard someone's ominous voice from the darkness of the underground palace. This something repeated what it had warned, that no one should come to him. Turning around, Hank saw how many decomposed and gnawed corpses lay inside. The monster believed that its words would not reach the people until they were all dead. Out of the darkness, the outlines of a man's body began to appear. He was leaning on a stick. Seeing that the new visitor was not leaving, he hurried him to attack, because he did not have enough courage to go outside. Hank decided to try his luck and loudly announced that he was not looking for a fight. He just needed shelter from the monster outside, but he was ready to defend himself if the enemy attacked first. Suddenly, a mysterious voice from the pitch darkness recognized the hero's voice. Without hesitation, he said the hero's name, but he was very angry, thinking that another monster had designs on him. Chester loudly warned him that he should not go further into the cave. If he touched it, he would die immediately. His body looked disgusting. It became like that because of the shimmering jade. As soon as you touch it, the body will begin to collapse, like all the bodies inside. The man was lucky because his essence was the possibility of rebirth, thanks to which he was able to survive. Chester turned to Hank again. He was incredibly happy to meet him. He also noted that his daughter would be happy to see him too. But the hero did not remember both of them. Then the man realized that the rumors about memory loss were true. He said that his daughter's name was Hannah. Jade can't reach it because he put it in a core, which he put in a frame so that other objects wouldn't touch it. Until the girl awakens her essence, he feels obligated to protect her. This time, he hoped that he could save his daughter. Chester asked if Hank was hungry. He had quite a lot of food in the cave. He suggested going inside to the fire, but asked to beware of the shimmering stones. The guy decided to take advantage of the opportunity and absorbed the bat that he took from Warren. The man was not surprised by this ability of the hero. He noted that he had not changed at all. He offered him to taste the meat of a giant crab, which he had taken from one of the thieves who had broken in there. The piece was larger than the guy's head and did not look very appetizing. Hank still decided to try the food, swallowing a piece. He was delighted with the taste of the meat. They continued to sit by the fire. The hero asked Chester what kind of relationship they had and what he knew about him. The man said that the guy was a benefactor. It was he who saved his daughter's life. They met before returning on the 8th day of the test. Everything around looked exactly the same as this time. People were running away from green monsters. Chester ran away with Hannah. They held hands. But the girl could not keep up with her father and asked him to move more slowly. But he was afraid that they would be caught and killed. Even then, goblins were practically unkillable. Even with their throats cut, they still attacked people and killed them with ease. Trying to hide from them, they ran very fast, and at some point the girl couldn't take it anymore. She tripped and fell. The man screamed and then tried to cover her with his body. The goblin was already in the jump and was preparing to chop them into small pieces, when suddenly he himself was chopped up. It was Hank. He appeared in front of the invincible goblins and dealt with all the monsters without blinking an eye. The main character led them to a secret shelter in the rock, where there were already many people, including children. Gina was waiting for them, who warmly greeted the guy. Hank brought them into his team, introduced them to the rest of the members, announcing that they were now part of it too. The other young girls in the camp were delighted to have a new, young, and pretty friend. They admired her beauty and height and asked many questions. The hero's team included people who were looking for a safe shelter. They didn't want to kill or get involved in fights anymore. They were all happy to have new members of the community. They needed labor to set up new barricades, so they became part of Hank's group and they all had a place to settle down instead of fighting for their lives. But unfortunately, one day they were deprived of all this. Hank returned to the camp, But instead of living people, he saw many mutilated corpses. His group was a place of cooperation, trust, and peace. Members were added every day. Soon they became the largest group in the area, but other groups conspired to attack them. After waiting for Hank to go to defend the stronghold, they attacked them, first trying to lure them outside with a girl who asked for help. The people on duty at the entrance tried to figure out whether she had come alone, asked her to take a couple of steps back and raise her hands. The girl was very beautiful, and one of them decided to go out to meet her, although he was warned that raising his hands would not save him from her essence. Approaching her, the man felt her for a weapon. He asked her not to do anything suspicious, and then they would go inside and she would get hot food. Suddenly, her body broke into many pieces, from which many sharp arrows emerged, piercing the guards. After killing them, the girl and many crazy people went inside Hank's camp. They were all thirsty for blood and killed everyone in a row, men, women, and children. When the hero returned to his hideout, he saw dozens of innocent bodies. He was furious, ordered the survivors to wait, and then went outside. And when he returned, he did not utter a word. But words would have been superfluous, because the blood of his opponents covered him from head to toe. One morning, Hank announced to the remaining survivors that he was leaving, and he didn't care whether they followed him, stayed, or joined other groups. But Chester cried and grieved over the loss of his daughter. He could not leave her there alone. He asked for forgiveness for not being able to follow him, even though he had saved them once. The man lost the meaning of life, and therefore did not want to go anywhere. He dreamed only of death. But because of his ability to revive, all attempts were in vain. He spent days thinking about different ways to commit suicide, until one day he learned about the existence of a cannibal cave, where any substance melts, leaving no trace behind. That's where they were. It's called the Green-Yellow Mine. That's why he looked like that, because he jumped into the cave then. He jumped there without regret, but with a great desire to die. Right there where the huge piece of jade lay, his body began to melt. And then it was reborn and melted again. And so, time after time, he fought with pain and suffering, plunging deeper and deeper into the jade until he touched its heart with his hand. The green-yellow mineral offered to grant special abilities to whoever absorbed it, and the man agreed. Then a bright explosion occurred. When he finally came to, he was completely burnt. There was no hair left on him. The light membrane protected the jade from decay. This precious mineral was an extremely rare element that gave additional essence. But the fact that he got it meant that he couldn't die. The man found it quite ironic that the second entity also had to do with survival. Chester began to wander in search of other places where he could die. Then he heard about people who opposed God. One of them was Hank. The man thought that since he intervened, this world would become better. But God called the souls of the defeated. He promised to give them a second chance and preserve their memories. And then they all came back to the new world. He was sitting on the pavement next to his daughter Hannah. As soon as they saw each other, they hugged and cried. After what happened, they went together to the cave, where he again jumped into the jade, and having taken out the mineral, forced his daughter to absorb it. Probably due to the unexpected contact with him, Hannah lost her mind and was still sleeping, so he hoped for the help of the great king. He knelt down in front of Hank. He begged him to take his daughter with him. He just wanted her to survive, but the guy doubted it since he had no memories left. The man promised to help find and give him back his boots, which once belonged to him. It was the only item in this area. He also advised the guy to find Jared. They were comrades before, and he even sacrificed his life for the hero. Chester promised that Hank would be able to increase his status if he cooperated with him again. He begged him to protect his daughter in exchange for information. Suddenly, a walkie-talkie in the shape of a shell started buzzing in the hero's pocket. The owner of the paired shell called him. It was Julian. He thought he was talking to Warren. Julian promised to come at sunset. He asked to get him something, and it didn't matter to him if it meant sacrificing all the people in the team. He also boasted that he had finally received the boots of the former great king, which lay in a box next to him. As soon as Hank finished talking on the radio, Chester asked who was on the other end of the sink and what he wanted. The hero explained that the man introduced himself as Julian. He said that he had found the boots and would soon reach the cave. The man saw this as a danger since, apparently, the blonde was aiming for the green-yellow mineral. But the main character did not remember who the caller was. Chester explained that they were once comrades with the hero, and now he led a powerful team. Hank didn't understand why he couldn't just talk to him, but the man was adamant that there was no guarantee that Julian was still a good person. He also noted that if all the groups entering the cave were normal, but they would not have such a strange smell, the crazy ones smelled special. Meanwhile, Julian led the procession of his numerous team, riding a large chicken, closing its eyes and controlling it with rods. One of his companions complimented his boots, noting that although the man had found them before his return, he had given them to the great king, and now they had returned to their rightful owner. But Julian explained that Hank found them first, and if it weren't for the entity that allowed him to survive critical moments, he would have been dead several times over. It was the main character who defeated the named monster that guarded the element, the sacred mummy, and was also able to defeat the pterosaur that no one could defeat. And the guy did it all alone, as if he was specially born for this crazy world. Such was the great king. In the past world, Hank did not allow the weak to shed blood. Everyone agreed with his words, including Julian, but he considered it a mistake. Since then, he thought that they were equal. But the hero took a step back to adapt to those around him. They were all too weak compared to him, including the leader. The blonde was sure that after his return, everything had changed. He was able to get his boots, and Hank was no longer a special player. Julian was very eager to obtain a special element that would grant him a second essence. He wanted to become special. His team approached the cave. They did not find any other people nearby, but decided not to lose their vigilance. Then they moved inside. They tried to shout to their comrade, but no one answered them. Then they decided to shine a light inside, when suddenly Chester's voice drove them away. He came out of the shadows of the cave to tell them that they were too late, as he had already managed to give the mineral to his daughter. The crew were irritated and were asking for trouble, but the man kept warning them not to come near or they would die. Then one of them said he was willing to try. He reached out and grabbed Chester by the face, but almost instantly his palm began to melt. Julian suggested not to waste time, but simply burn everything to the ground. But the cave guard was against it since his daughter was still sleeping. Just as the man began to threaten them, the commander suddenly activated his essence. He couldn't allow the gem to belong to someone like Chester. Suddenly, Julian's shell radio started buzzing in his pocket. The caller wanted to take his boots back. The guy recognized Hank's voice. The main character offered his opponent to fight each other. In case of victory, he would receive his essence, and in case of loss, he would return his boots. Without having time to wait for an answer, the hero stood on the edge of the cliff. He called the blonde a dirty, envious person, and also accused him of cowardice, since he did not agree to go out to fight. Hank continued to shout, pointing out that the guy had stolen his things. The others on the team recognized the great king and became curious about what he was talking about. The hero didn't understand why Julian was standing there silently. Perhaps he was afraid. But Hank suggested that the guy attack first, since his essence and boots were at stake. The commander turned to his like-minded person who understood the hint and activated his essence. Julian tried to decide what was more important to him at the moment. On one side of the scale, he had a valuable mineral, and on the other side, the taste of steel. They were equal to him. But he really wanted to cut off the hero's arms and legs. Then Julian decided to go on the attack. He jumped towards the guy, but Hank got ahead of him and used his powerful kick ability. The hero nailed him deep into the rock. Stones flew around. He continued to strike, only now fighting with the team remaining below. Their manager was already coming to his senses, but he didn't understand why Hank was dealing with them so easily, since they were outnumbered and he was alone. One of the community members looked at the hero with the gaze of the Gorgon Medusa, and the guy's leg began to turn to stone. This gave the others an advantage, since now he could not move. They then began to attack him several at a time, but Hank deliberately grabbed the metal parts of their weapons in order to then absorb them. After saying the code word, his wounds immediately regenerated. He was able to hit one of the attackers, but someone attacked from behind, cutting his shoulder. But all the hero's cuts healed instantly. He was able to kill one of the team members. Then he absorbed someone's weapon again, and another wound disappeared. He was as good as new. Julian's supporters began to run away in all directions. They were horrified that the great king had no wounds left. It seemed that it was impossible to defeat him. But then the blonde fulfilled the conditions for activating his essence. Releasing magic, he was furious and believed that Hank appeared in his way to interfere. The hero sincerely did not understand what he was talking about, which only angered the attacker even more, who could not comprehend that a guy with no memories had managed to knock him down. Julian was desperate to defeat the great king, and they continued to fight until Hank knocked out his opponent with one blow. The hero began to feel pain all over his body. Chester was worried about him, but the guy convinced him that everything was fine and he would soon feel better. The blond man lying on the ground noticed a bottle of pills that Kent had previously given to the king. They could activate suppressed abilities, as well as erase thoughts and emotions. These pills had a face. They tempted the guy to take them, promising that he would immediately feel much better. The guys noticed too late what he was going to do. They worked instantly. He was not just healed, but became several times a larger monster, striking the guy. He felt how magic overwhelmed him. The battle armor was extremely unhappy that her boyfriend got the pills, since she had prepared them especially for him, and he had thrown them into the cave. Julian continued to rejoice. He was all over, and suffering no longer presented a problem for him. He felt wonderful. Their fingers intertwined. Hank tried to contain the monster's strength. Enhanced by the drugs, Julian believed that the hero could not come to his senses. He was no longer a king. The monster then crushed the guy's palm, who screamed in pain. He wanted the hero to no longer be able to use the essence, since he was not worthy of being called a great king. Meanwhile, as the monster felt all its power and magic, Hank could barely stand. All his fingers were broken. He tried to parry the blows. But just as he decided to use his super powerful foot, Julian caught him by the ankle and threw him into a stone wall. Suddenly, tears began to appear on the monster's back, from which new hands began to grow. He acquired a new magical body with 6 hands. This gave him a significant advantage in the fight. Now he could deliver blow after blow. Without stopping, Hank was saved from death by the armor, which turned out to be very durable. Chester watched the battle from the sidelines. It seemed to him that things were bad. He took out a dagger, which he was going to give to his daughter. Julian was thinking about tearing off the guy's arms. They were too much trouble. When he got down to business, the guy started screaming in pain, but the monster liked to hear them. He knew that without his arms, the great king would not be able to use his essence. But Hank had fought all his previous battles, including the one where they were torn off. The boy saw the image of Gina in his head. Then he came to his senses and smiled, answering that even without arms he could fight. But the monster didn't want to give up the victory to the enemy so easily. He wanted to become a hero in this life, and not a weakling like Hank, calling on him to behave in a manner befitting his weakness. The monster grabbed the hero and then held him with all of his many arms. He was burning with the desire to break the guy in half. Realizing that this was his last chance to stop the enemy, Chester threw himself on his back, holding on around his neck. No matter how strong the magical armor was, the jade would still melt it. He was ready to hold out until until his essence stopped working, or until the jade completely corroded the guy. The old man's body was covered in bubbles, and although Julian's armor was melting, it did not affect his human appearance in any way. Chester tried with all his might to wake up Hank, who was lying on the floor with his arms torn off and covered in blood. He wanted to hand him his dagger and begged him to take care of his daughter, and then completely turned into a precious stone. Hannah watched her father's sacrifice, but could do nothing about it, while Julian rejoiced that he had survived thanks to his strength. Turning around, he saw Hank stand up and pick up the fallen dagger with his mouth, then place it in his hand. After uttering the code word, the hero's arms grow back and he regains his strength, then attacks the enemy with great speed and smashes his arm with one powerful blow. Julian envied this ability, but Hank continued to attack him, claiming that he was wrong when he said that he knew him well. The hero continued to strike the enemy without stopping, finishing with his signature salamander trident foot attack. Having finally finished the battle, Hank stood surrounded by corpses. Julian was defeated. For his death, the hero received coins as a reward. There were more of them than are usually given for an ordinary murder. Suddenly, an image of Kent appeared. She was lying on a bottle of pills, trying to get the guy to take one. She was licking her lips with her long, demonic tongue. But he didn't want to do that, because it was those pills that had turned Julian into a monster. They were dangerous, so he just kicked them away. The young man heard someone's muffled whimpering. Turning around, he noticed Hannah sitting next to the transformed body of her father. The girl cried bitterly, calling for her father. Hank approached her, and as soon as she looked at him, she immediately recognized him as the great king from the past world. She continued to sob, stood up abruptly, and went to him to bury her face in his chest for comfort. She wanted to know why her dad looked like that. The hero hugged his orphaned friend, trying to calm her down a little. Then they decided to cover the body of the deceased with stones, and the girl cut off a lock of her hair to leave it at the makeshift grave. Hannah said goodbye to Chester in this way. She told him that it was time for her to leave. Hank, meanwhile, was packing his things and did not forget about his boots. The girl wanted to go with him. The guy told her father's words. He asked him to take care of his daughter. She was delighted. She wanted to start fighting the enemies together. Suddenly, the main character felt a strange smell. He covered the girl with himself and kicked the air. He hit one of Julian's associates, Jack, hitting him in the nose, while he was worried about how he could be discovered. Hank explained that people like him smelled like animals, and also suggested that he leave himself, otherwise he would be carried out by force but already dead. But the guy did not want to leave. He was afraid that he would not survive alone. Jack was on his knees. He remembered Julian talking about a place called Katla, where you can get influence points. This is a city that arose after the start of the main trial. It appeared in the desert as a result of the merging of 3 needles of Cassandra. People flocked to such cities to gain knowledge and power. They appeared in many desert areas. Their team was also going there, and he knew how to get there. Hank didn't think long. He was curious about this place. So he offered Jack to take them. But first they needed to find shelter before sunset. They also had to pack their things. An oasis was waiting for them along the way. It was less of a walk than the city. There they could get water and food, and also admire the wonderful view. Jack expected them to arrive before dawn, but strongly advised them to stay away from the giant cacti. Coming out of the cave, Hank saw a large saddled rooster. He decided that he would carry things on it, at the same time warning the newcomer about betrayal and its consequences. Hannah gathered her things. Everyone was ready and decided to move out. The gray-haired man said that he would lead everyone along a safe route, but literally immediately they were attacked by a huge worm. They had to urgently run away from it. Jack thought that the monsters in this area were small, so everything would be fine. But the guys had to fight back. Hank tried to attack the worm, but not very successfully. Then Hannah entered the battle, using her essence and a spear. The spear contained a piece of jade, and as soon as it hit the monster, its skin began to melt and it fell down dead. The guy was impressed by her abilities. Jack, meanwhile, climbed the rock and saw an oasis in the distance. He called the others to head in the right direction. But the city did not look like a paradise. Huge trees grew through houses that were badly damaged, their roots spreading everywhere. In one of the basements, a man was crying. He was covered in blood. He was asking for mercy. Since he was not guilty, he did not know that he had come to that very place. The man in the hood did not want to hear these words. He took out a hammer and killed the young man. He believed that you can't break into someone else's house, even if you didn't know it, since it's a crime. He was angry that low-class people like the murdered one were walking around everywhere. He was already really tired of it. There were already a lot of corpses around the room. The boys entered the deserted city. They were very confused by the smell. Continuing on their way, they came across mountains of the dead, assuming that there was a struggle for power there and no one survived. Hannah suggested that they go into one of the buildings. She was sure that there used to be food sold in the basement. Jack was afraid to go down, but Hank insisted, since the guy's essence allowed him to become invisible, and if there was a person or a monster there, he would be able to signal through the shell. He suggested making 1 call if there was a person there, and several if there were many. And he also strongly asked not to try to deceive them. The guy activated his invisibility and began to descend inside. He was very scared, and he begged to save him if something happened. Hank counted to 100 and decided that he could go to the basement too. Hannah wanted to go with him, but he insisted that she should stay upstairs. Eventually, the girl convinced him to go together, and they started going down to the basement. It was quiet and dark there, when suddenly the radio gave a signal. There was 1 signal, which meant there was 1 person there. He had already managed to grab Jack by the neck and tried to strangle him. He was unhappy that all sorts of insects were walking in his domain. He realized that there were other people besides the guy. He called them to come closer so he could destroy them all at once. As soon as the guys entered, the guy in the hood immediately recognized Hank. Although he could not believe his eyes, he took off his hat and greeted the hero. He recognized the great king by his face and boots, and throwing Jack aside, he ran to Hank and hugged him tightly, wondering where he had disappeared to. The hero did not understand why the boy rushed to hug him. He explained that after returning he tried to find the guy, but did not know where he was, so he decided to start from this place. The guy boasted that the journey to the city usually takes 2 weeks, but he was able to get here in just 3 days, which he was very proud of. Taking the great king by the hand, He joyfully let him inside so that he could rest, and he also hoped that they could talk. Hank stopped and let go of his hand. He wanted to know who was in front of him and how he knew him. The boy was surprised that the hero did not remember him. Henry's mood quickly changed. He was still very glad that they met, because if he had forgotten Hank, he still would not have abandoned him. He then gave the hero the Ring of the Victor, which, when activated, allows you to deal critical damage to your opponent on the first hit. This ring used to belong to him. He gave it to Henry, saying that he was like a younger brother to him. The boy wanted to return it, but was ready to take it back if he was very active. But Hank didn't understand why he should be returned if he was so precious. But the guy was a little upset that his friends still didn't believe him. Jack turned to Henry. He recognized the guy and called him Mr. New Moon, but then explained to everyone that he was one of the king's close associates. The 4 moons helped the sun in everything. The great king. He was the strongest of them all. The guy confirmed his words, hoping that the hero would recognize him. He suddenly flew up to Hannah and grabbed her sharply. Hank tried to force him to let the girl go since he was protecting her. New Moon believed that the hero did not need a girl on the team. He called her weak and thought that she would fall from one blow from anyone who was lying in the hall. Hank decided to clarify. He killed all these people. The guy confirmed that he did it. Those who came irritated him and he had to do it. He believed that the hero's comrades were weak and not suitable for him. They were belittling the value of the great king before the guy seemed stronger to him. Henry suspected that the man before him had lost his fighting spirit, but he was determined to make him a great warrior again by first eliminating the weak. But Hank got very angry at his words. He could not understand why he wanted to kill his friends since he called himself his brother. Then he hit the boy. The guy remembered Chester's words about the beasts. That's what they call those who went crazy in the New World after the tower appeared. These people killed everyone without hesitation because of a simple desire. They gave off a specific smell, the same one emanated from the Lord of the New Moon. Hank continued the attack, but the guy quickly dodged, and eventually the hero decided to try to put on the ring that had just been returned to him. He threw super powerful punches again and again, but each time Heinrich avoided them without the slightest problem, keeping his hands behind his back. At one point, the young man jumped on Hank's shoulders. He admired his kicks, was glad that he was not mistaken in the hero. He was the same as before. The king threw the boy off himself. Then Henry proposed that the winner of the duel be awarded to the one who touched the other first. And just as the hero swung his leg to strike, his foot was very close to the guy's face, but he was able to get away from him unnoticed. Hank was already exhausted in this fight. The guy said that since the beginning of Enlightenment, his abilities began to improve very quickly, and his strength and speed went beyond imagination. Jack watched from the side as what was happening. He couldn't understand what was happening. They were moving too fast. His eyes couldn't keep up with their movements. Henry decided to play tag with his rival. He suggested that the hero try to catch him where he claps his hands. Hank was angry that he couldn't even touch his opponent. The difference in their abilities wasn't that big, but suddenly he remembered a similar incident. The hero then activated the Victor's Determination ability on his ring. All it took was one hit. But as soon as he swung, the guy immediately reacted and squatted down, and then he was able to touch the armor with his foot, thus declaring his victory. Since the attack of the winner's determination failed, with such a small blow, Henry caused the guy to have critical consequences in response. The guy spurted blood from his mouth. New Moon realized what had happened. He decided that it was because he was hanging out with losers, which was why his grip had weakened. He asked the hero to trust him, even if he was unpleasant to him now. But then he would definitely be grateful. He was ready to start dealing with one of his comrades. But Hank stood in front of him, protecting Hannah. Suddenly he shouted loudly to Jack to start now, but he didn't understand what it was about. Then the guy tried his luck and struck, but failed the chance. The hero injured himself again with his mistake. Heinrich was upset that he still didn't understand anything. There was still a small difference between them. Deciding to demonstrate it, he began to move around the room at super speed, which created the impression that there was a lot of him. He encouraged Hank, because if he could eventually touch him, he would cause him critical damage. The hero tried to catch the real master, but with each blow he missed and only made things worse for himself, eventually falling to the floor from loss of blood. Then he thought that he had given Hank the ring too soon, that he was not yet ready to use it, and he reached out to take it. But the hero grabbed Heinrich's body with his arms, and for a second he thought that he remembered him. But Hank had a different plan of action. He held the new moon so that Hannah could pierce it with her spear. The guy handed her the ring so that they would have at least some advantage. The gentleman realized that Hank was faking the penalty kickback to trick him, and he couldn't believe how he could have decided to pull the trick. Hoping that he would now leave them alone, the heroes wanted to leave. But Heinrich was not going to give up. He claimed that he would kill them all. Hank put the ring back on and suggested playing tag again. Having struck, he hurt the guy very much, so his inner voice told him. Hank struck a few more blows and finished everything with the final one. The next moment, some white viscous liquid began to pour out of Henry's mouth. It spurted like a powerful fountain, which shocked everyone present. The guy didn't look like a nice boy anymore. He was covered in this liquid and his eyes were glowing green. He told them that he was okay and not to worry. Henry's essence continued to convince him that Hank had hurt him. Then his body turned into a huge white ball. The hero realized that he was possessed by God. Balls began to emerge from this ball, which then turned into long ribbons. There were a lot of them, and they grabbed the team and hung them in the air. At the end of each of them, there were sharp spikes. The hero began to fight them off with his feet. He was able to free himself, and then Hannah, the girl, fell to the floor and hurt herself. The main character asked her if she knew what was going on with Henry. Then he came close to her and whispered a plan of action in her ear. She ran as fast as she could in the opposite direction from the scene of the events. Jack followed her. He was terrified and asked her to wait for him. Last time, the hero did not have enough strength to defeat a creature whose capabilities went beyond human ones. He urgently needed to gain an advantage that would allow him to resist the possessed god. Hank decided to request a status. It was time to use the accumulated coins to raise his status of physical strength, speed, and durability. He remembered Gina telling him that his essence restored its powers through the light of absorbing elements, but he could still use them to their full extent afterward. The hero remembered that he could try to eat the ring, and in this way he was able to learn the technique of the winner's determination. Inside the ball, meanwhile, Heinrich tried to resist the deity. He tried to convince him that Hank was not to blame and he himself was injured. He tearfully begged God not to touch the hero. He insisted that he was a believer, but the deity considered that he was too kind a child and that the hero smelled bad. Then the deity Alex grew several times in size. Now it was not a ball, but something resembling a huge jellyfish. Hank realized that it would not be easy to escape from such a monster. Kent appeared on his shoulder. She offered her help in the battle, ready to replace him at any moment. But he threw it off his shoulder, not wanting to go through this ride again. But the deity did not give up. Meanwhile, he continued to spend coins to improve the speed characteristics. The hero rushed to attack the enemy. He gracefully dodged the long, stinging ribbons. Hank was much slower than them, so in flight, he continued to buy points to speed. And at first, he managed to cut the tentacles with his kicks, but then Alex grabbed him by the leg and threw him forcefully to the side. The guy understood that his strength was not enough to cope with this strange monster, and at this rate, he would lose. He was already completely exhausted, continuing to buy speed, but the monster did not even strain. Hank could not get through them to the body. Using the ring's actions and activating the victor's resolve, he tried to attack again. But the blow did not cause the necessary destruction, and then the ribbons pierced him through. Kent was immediately furious at what Alex was doing to her charge, and she demanded that she immediately switch with him. Hank resisted, but then he activated his second essence beyond the horizon, and the confrontation between the gods was confirmed. His deity was delighted with this plan. She supported him. The hero, meanwhile, began a crazy martial arts dance. Alex was amazed that a man could suppress a deity with his will, while Hank was turning into a better version of himself, building up muscle mass. She promised that the retribution for the fact that the hero harmed her believer and caused him pain would be cruel. She promised to make the guy repent. Hank was finally fully prepared for battle, and he challenged Alex to choose where the first blow would be aimed. Suddenly, water gushed out of the broken pipe. It began to fill everything inside. Hannah and Jack ran into the room. They were carrying bottles of water in their hands. It turned out that earlier Hank had asked them to go to the boiler room and turn on the water. The girl was wondering if they had brought enough water. Hank touched his boots and then absorbed them, giving him the ability to control the clear water around him using telekinesis. He began to try to learn how to use water, trying to make jets rise into the air and create a whirlpool around him. The guy was filled with confidence that now not only luck but also talent was on his side, and he would finally be able to confront the deity. Hank tried to direct the streams of water towards the monster, and although he was impressed, he still tried to attack the guy from behind, who successfully repelled the attack with a vertical surface of water. The main character tried to create huge snakes from water. They looked quite frightening, ready to attack the enemy at any moment. Looking at the deity with a confident gaze, he declared that such monsters were not needed in their world. Then he raised the snakes and streams of water into the air. But the deity was sure that it would be impossible for any man to defeat him. But under the powerful streams, his liquid armor began to disintegrate. Heinrich emerged from the protective shell, having lost faith. He looked at Hank and called him, but he did not want to contact him. He wanted the guy to disappear. The hero then delivered a powerful kick to his opponent's chest. He screamed in pain and landed on the floor with great force, punching a hole in it. Mr. New Moon was unconscious. The system confirmed that the second entity was used by Hank for self-defense. The deity was expelled from the guy. Thus, the hero received a new achievement: expelling gods. The hero tried to comprehend that he had just defeated a god. His body began to take on its normal form, but he knew that it was too early to let his guard down. Suddenly, Henry woke up and sat up. The guys didn't understand how this was happening. He started crying, calling Hank and calling him incredible. He rushed to embrace the hero, asking for forgiveness for being wrong, and he also promised that he would not kill everyone anymore. The young man continued to admire the king and was interested in how Hank was able to get rid of the seal of the believer and dispel the presence of God. But Hank, in fact, himself did not understand how this happened. Heinrich tried to understand whether he did it unconsciously. It seemed incredible to him. The great king did not share his younger comrade's delight. He did not understand how one could be happy in such a situation. The world was completely destroyed. There was complete chaos all around. The law of the jungle reigned. Everyone was for himself. In this world, the weak are subdued by force, and crazy days and battles go one after another, where everyone hates each other and tries to kill. Henry thought it was natural, and he also thought the creators had done a great job of making them feel that way. He decided to explain that enlightenment is not just a game for the entertainment of angels. It is preparation for a quest, similar to a test. But even if you finish the quest, the game itself will not end, because in the end, everything must end in the head. There is a hidden image in the status window that displays the willpower indicators. As soon as they reach the maximum, the person breaks down. Each person's breakdown happens in their own way. The instigator of it all was the main god Casita, who captured the land. In the new world, there is only one law. The strongest will survive. This is the rule of natural selection. Only then will the will of humanity be broken and a new order will begin. Kill or be killed. When the game ends, the world will be ruled by the representative of the strongest god. But for the earth, enlightenment continues because there is only one person left whose willpower has not been broken. It was Hank. No one knew about it before returning. Everyone thought the goal of the game was to kill God, and those who continue to think so aimed at the great king. Henry was able to overhear all this from the angels, because after returning, all they did was put forward hypotheses about the meaning of the new world. New Moon heard that the king had taken over the leadership of the people. He hoped that with such a leader, the world would be able to return to normal someday. Hank realized that everything he had done before returning was pointless. But the gentleman didn't know what to say. He thought it didn't matter. Henry was confident that at the moment the hero was at a higher level, few could repeat his achievements. Just as he was starting his old speech, that with him the boy would become a great king again, he was stopped. He decided to sit down and rest a little before going to Katla. As soon as they reached the city, they were met by a new mad man. He impaled Jack on his spear, calling their lives miserable. He noticed that there was a seal on Hank's cheek. He did not let them in, wondering if they even knew where they were. The man called the city of Katla the holy land of the deity Aruga. Behind the fence, there was a large, beautiful, and developed settlement with a pyramid in the center. The city was huge. It consisted of several circles. In the largest, there was a large tower. In the others, there were pyramids in the center. The city was surrounded by powerful walls. Approaching the main gate, Jack announced that they would have to pay for entry, and he volunteered to negotiate personally. Suddenly, a very muscular man descended on them from above on a rope. He had a spear in his hands, and he was obviously in an unfavorable mood. A gray-haired man came out to meet him. He was scared by the guards' hostility. He said that they were ready to pay for entry if required. But he didn't even want to listen to what the negotiator was going to tell him. He took out his trident and impaled the guy on it. He didn't want to see the branded ones in the city. The boys decided to hide to discuss the situation. Despite the fact that they had plenty of money, it made no sense, since due to the blessing of another god, Hank would not be able to enter. This part of the region is ruled by the god Aruga. The city was summoned from another world so that the believers could force others to follow their commandment. All these people, like earthlings, passed the test and received the role of managing this place, becoming like angels. There are two ways to get inside. To get resident status and missions, you need to donate a certain amount of coins every day. By choosing the religion of Aruga, you can become a full-fledged resident of the city. If you collect the maximum number of influence points and get a part of the city, the test will end. Hank ordered them to go first and take his things with them. He asked if they had enough time to get inside. Henry immediately agreed. He took Hannah by the hand and promised that he would look after her, and the hero himself headed for the exit, asking the guys to take care of each other. The guy decided to get inside another way. He killed the guard and then took his device for lifting up. It seemed lighter than it actually was. Hank hooked himself to the cord, then fired his pistol upward so that the hook caught on the edge of the fence and pulled himself upward. Having climbed up, he looked around the city and decided where to go, but suddenly noticed Michael sitting on a dais. Hank explained that he was not allowed in because of the stigma and that Jack was killed, but he cannot walk in the desert forever. And besides, this world originally belonged to people. The guy wanted to know where God was, since it was his land, and then he decided to go down again, thus getting the achievement of the first intruder and saboteur. Meanwhile, Hannah stood at the entrance and tried to get inside through control. She was given a list for her mission. The girl did not understand what was required of her, and just as she wanted to hit the inspector, Heinrich grabbed her and covered her mouth and then thanked her for the mission. They got inside. Hannah was interested in the reason why he agreed to such conditions for passage. She was very angry. Then he explained to her that in this community, natural selection reigns supreme, and any person without strength and power is considered trash. New Moon had no idea how the commandment would end if the city was taken by force, since Aruga wanted to have a certain number of believers at all times. This means that his main goal is to strengthen faith, and not to increase the number of believers. He threatened the girl that if she does anything that harms Hank, he will kill her. Suddenly, Taurus approached them with his retinue of guards. He recognized Lord New Moon and noted that they had not seen each other since their return. He greeted the new guests and noted that it was a great honor for him to meet Henry. But the latter did not recognize him and asked him to leave his sight. Taurus did not take offense at his words. He explained that from today on, he was the manager of the shopping district. His essence, the sweet tongue, specializes in bargaining and persuasion, and also allows him to instill the necessary thoughts in his interlocutors. He boasted that with his brains, essence, and money, it was easy to get into the right team and get a high position. He then offered the boys a mission that would earn them a lot of fusion points, which could guarantee them a great life. Henry was tired of listening to him and asked him to explain everything in a few words. Then Taurus invited them to work with him. He explained that he had a lot of influence, but not enough power, so he offered to help each other and strengthen their cooperation in the future. At the same time, he threatened to kill them if they refused. But Henry was stunned by the number of words spoken and did not like to hear the threat addressed to him. But the merchant's retinue had already put their spears forward, protecting the owner. He asked if the guy was sure that in case of a battle he would be able to protect the girl next to him. Noting that many would not mind having a slave of any race, they are sold here at a rather high price. But Henry was already fed up with this conversation, and he did not appreciate the threat towards them, so he activated his essence, offering to kill the man. Taurus was offended by the attitude of the Lord of the New Moon towards his person. He wanted to tell about his essence, but he was interrupted. The uniformed soldiers claimed they were attacked at the northeastern gate, and he called on everyone to join in. Hank jumped over the fence, killed several guards, and he himself was badly injured, so he urgently needed to absorb the elements. When he tried to eat their weapons, he realized that nothing came out, deciding that it was because they were not human. So he began to look for shelter. Then he tried to tear up one of his tickets to call the gun dealer, and a bright girl named Marie appeared. She was very loud when she greeted the client, but she noticed that there was no one around. Marie was scared. She tried to understand who called her. It turned out that she sat right on the guy and didn't notice him until he reacted. Then she apologized and helped him up. But Hank wasn't thrilled with her thunderous voice. He angrily whispered to her to shut her mouth. then covered it with his hand, looking around to see if she had attracted any unnecessary attention. Marie started to cry, realizing that she had been summoned during the battle, wondering who had given such a bad man like Hank her exclusive summoning ticket. The seller laid out her goods on a rug right on the floor. The hero said that he didn't care what to buy. He was ready to spend all his coins on the goods. He took the first dagger he came across and decided to buy it. The girl was surprised and asked where he was going to use it. Marie was very puzzled by his answer that he was just going to eat it. She immediately imagined him biting off the blade and chewing it, thinking the guy was crazy. She was greatly shocked to see that after absorbing it, all of his wounds disappeared, and his essence also allowed him to gain the abilities of objects. Suddenly, the girl became embarrassed and asked if she could see the client's status in her magic ball. They sat down opposite each other, and after she said the code word and the client's name, she was given access to information about the guy. Opening his status, she saw all of his existing techniques and abilities. She realized that he was gathering elements, and then she suddenly grabbed his fingers. Marie noticed the imprint of the winner's ring since it was spattered with blood. She was unable to see it at first. Hank decided to find out if such a diverse number of features was a great rarity. She then noticed that the boy had the mark of the goddess and considered him a very dangerous person, then screamed in response to his question that it was incredible. The girl explained that initially the elements were only in the possession of historians and great heroes of various races from many worlds, and records were kept of these treasures. Therefore, the abilities were not so easy to obtain, and in general, the fact that elements are imprinted on the hero's body and soul after use is an amazing skill. For example, accelerating blood loss causes his blows to bleed, while maximizing pain increases the damage he deals to his opponent with each blow. She considered all this unthinkable, and especially the favor of God, which is not easier to obtain, because to do this you need to please him. She also noted that the guy can use his abilities more effectively, and if he starts buying exactly the elements he needs, they will only improve the abilities he already has. Then she suggested that he buy the corsage of a fallen aristocrat, which increased pain maximization and reduced weight. Hank immediately agreed to her offer and bought the product, and also asked for a bag. The girl was very happy. Marie said that he had a special storage where he could store elements, but the guy didn't understand it and decided that it was always faster to get what he needed from the bag. The saleswoman then began to gather her things, thanking him for the purchase as she left, when suddenly she noticed his cuirass, complimented him on the excellent workmanship, and Hank got ahead of her and informed her that the item was not for sale. The girl really wanted to buy his armor. Then her assessment of the seller would increase several hundred times, and no one else in the association would dare to disrespect her. Marie bowed. She understood that selling something given by God was a sin, and a great misfortune awaited the person who did so, but it didn't hurt to try. But she finally lost her dreams, drooling and saying that if she had bought the cuirass, she would have been able to take the position of branch manager and would have achieved success as a salesperson. When suddenly Hank noticed the shadows of unknown people, he quickly grabbed the seller. She screamed in fear, not understanding why he was behaving like this, because work comes first for her. The hero tried to save the girl from the attacking warriors guarding the city. They had already jumped from the roof and were flying towards them. He threw the girl aside so that she would not be harmed, and he himself began to fight with his rivals who were armed with sharp daggers. Their faces were completely wrapped in ribbons, their ears were pointed, and only one eye. Hank was full of confidence. He grabbed his scimitar and swallowed it. The hero, with his irresistible kick attack, was able to cut off the creature's hand holding the dagger and then struck it in the head. In a battle with another, he was able to cut off its head with just one easy move, which flew past Marie, who screamed in fear. After the battle was over and Hank was the winner, he approached the saleswoman and solemnly announced that he had a proposition for her. He confessed that he was going to capture this city, which was called the Holy Land, so he was sure that it was full of divine items. His proposal was that he would sell her all these items, and in exchange, she would collect goods that suited his abilities. Then she would be able to become not only the head of the branch, but the president of the association. The girl was afraid that Hank would have a hard time, but he didn't care. After a few moments, she was very happy and agreed. They shook hands, and she said that she relied on him. Marie handed the guy her personal call-up tickets and also admitted that she would eagerly await his next call-up. After the girl left, Hank wondered out loud if all salesmen were like this. Then he took out his pills from Kent and decided to sell them next time. But upon hearing his words, the deity became very angry. She was surprised by his insolence and declared that she would not allow it. The hero closed his ears so as not to hear her anymore. The great king continued his journey to conquer the city. In another house, he killed several creatures in masks, when suddenly his hand began to tremble from the jar of pills. It was Kent. She claimed that the pills would not leave him even if he threw them away. She was angry that he had even thought about selling her gift and wanted to punish him. Hank was also angry because she had given them to him of her own free will so she could take them and get out if something didn't suit her. Then he took out his tickets and wanted to call the seller to sell them, but she appreciated his rebellious spirit, and her heart almost jumped out of her chest. Suddenly, the system checked the faith buffer and executed the punishment for breaking the rule. Hank asked if she shared his pain. The punishment was an eye for an eye. The deity was delighted and explained that all this happened because of his essence. Then the guy decided to make the pain even more excruciating and was going to tear off the ticket. But he felt a strange pain from the bottle of pills. It went through his body like lightning, preventing him from calling the seller. Kent stated that she could adjust the system to him. The pills turned out to be a living being and took the moment to escape from Hank's hand. The hero chased after the can, surprised that the element could move on its own, but they fell into the hands of the guard. He took several at once and immediately began to transform into a huge, crazy monster. The guy asked for status, but the man's hand ended up on his face. Still holding the boy, he slammed him into the ground and then ripped out a huge column of concrete and threw it at him. Hank managed to jump out from under her, and then, finding himself in the air above the man, he used a brutal kick and killed the Bemurian and received coins for it. Having finished the fight, the guy looked back as he was trying to find where the pills had gone again. They were again trying to run away from him. The hero heard someone shouting that there was an intruder here, so he used his abilities to jump on the walls of houses, still trying to catch up with the pills. On the way, he was overtaken by the Bemurians. He quickly dealt with them so as not to lose his element. They jumped off the cliff, and he after them. Meanwhile, Hannah stood surrounded by many bloody corpses. They attacked her, and then the mineral inside her melted them all. The girl tried to comprehend that it was she who killed so many people. When suddenly someone touched her shoulder, turning around, she saw Taurus's face. She didn't expect this and screamed in fear, but it turned out to be Heinrich. He wanted to make fun of her, but at the same time he appreciated her, because before he considered her useless. Together they went out into the city street. The bell rang. It was a notification of a new announcement that everyone who was there received. It was about Hank. For a large reward, it was offered to capture an infidel who had infiltrated the Holy Land. Anyone could take part. The residents really wanted to get so many coins for catching the stranger. A competition began. Then Heinrich and Hannah ran to look for their friend so as not to let him be captured. New Moon didn't expect things to develop so quickly. He was afraid that if things continued like this, the whole city would become their enemy. Hank made his way through the broken walls. He was covered in blood. Then he found someone's dagger, but unfortunately it was not suitable for absorption. Then he remembered that he had one more element left in his bag. He took out the corsage and ate it, using the code word, and his wounds were healed. Having jumped into the abyss, the guy landed in the very center where the city's defenders were looking for him. One of them cut his cheek with his trident. Suddenly, he saw a bottle of pills lying on the road. He went up and took them, but they were no longer as active as before. Hank noticed that they had calmed down. He assumed that they had some specific goal. Looking around, he noticed images of eyes on the wall. The drawing was located above the entrance to the temple. A blue light was coming from there. The guy decided to go inside. The bright glow interfered with his view. He saw a glass cabinet. It was the one that emitted such a bright color. The cabinet itself was inside a huge stone statue. The guy assumed it was a divine item. It looked like claws, a pair of lunar sickles, a long curved blade, and double handles. Hank remembered Heinrich's words that the city kept the divine objects of Aruga, which were used by the great king in his past life, and who was even able to kill a god with them. He tried to touch the screen, but was immediately hit by multiple electric shocks, followed by a loud alarm. The townspeople heard the signal and realized that it was coming from the treasure palace, so they decided to go there en masse to catch the guy. The hero decided to touch the cabinet again, but this time he held his hand on the glass for a long time. He screamed from the pain caused by the electric shocks, but he had no access to the object. The guy's entire hand was badly burned, and suddenly God Aruga spoke to him. calling Hank a fool and also assuring him that his desires would destroy him. Realizing that he was unable to fight the essence of a god, he decided to run away to find an object to absorb and further heal. God warned him that he was being hunted, but Hank ran outside anyway and was confronted by an angry mob who wanted to kill him for the reward. The crowd was already aiming for an attack, but one of them recognized the great king in the guy's face, while he was holding his charred hand. The villagers began to argue whether they should kill the guy now, but if they captured him, they would get coins. Someone wanted his essence, but already had two. One daredevil decided to try to attack the king first, since the others had been chatting for too long. But before he had even gotten halfway there, he was torn apart by a man in a scarf and mask. With just a wave of his hand, he managed to tear the man's flesh into two pieces. The madman declared that Hank was his prey. The hero had no idea what awaited him, and he had no fear at all. He admired how the old man hit the man right on the bull's eye. A masked, red-robed resident attacked Hank first. Then a second one in blue robe joined him. Everyone thought he used the splitting technique. The second attacker took out a round metal sledgehammer and struck the hero in the face, causing blood to spurt from his mouth and nose. He struck again, causing the boy to curl up in pain, preparing to strike again, but was stopped by his twin, who said that the boy would die. They sent a report on the completion of the mission to the high priest, and after that, concrete blocks began to grow out of the ground in front of them. A giant staircase appeared that led into the temple, and at the top of it stood the high priest Ronald, dressed in a cassock. Ronald began his speech by telling how the god's land had been desecrated by an invading infidel, which enraged the god Aruga. Those who captured the criminal were promised a reward, and the criminal faced severe punishment from Aruga. Ronald decided to perform a ritual of purification with the blood of the sinner himself, since the land of God was defiled, then ordered Hank to be brought. Two masked men took the hero by the arms and led him to the priest, but they were stopped by a huge guard, who allowed only one of them to rise, since it was he who had grabbed the sinner. The remaining man, wearing a mask and red attire, was ordered not to move, and guards stood around him with spears pointed at him. Ronald walked up to the glass box, bowed to it, and asked permission to use the divine object. The glass was scattered and the sickles could be taken. This is the greatest treasure among the divine objects of the sun Aruga. They are proof of the existence of God. The priest was indignant that the infidel dared to encroach on them, and also that he should not count on mercy. Hank couldn't get up, so he crawled up the stairs. The guard forced him to stand up so as not to waste the priest's time, and then stuck the tip of the spear into his hand. The hero immediately recognized the metal object and gave the command to absorb it. His wounds immediately healed. He rose to his feet and knocked out the guard with one kick, rejoicing that he could finally destroy everything here. Then Henry emerged from under the blue robe. He encouraged his comrade as he rushed upward. The guard came to his senses. The man tried to stop the hero, but New Moon forestalled his attack and struck him with his foot, causing him to fly upward at great speed. The guards ran to the top to stop the invaders, but they were surrounded by sharp spikes, which then pierced their bodies. This was Hannah activating her witch essence. Hank continued to climb the stairs. The high priest was furious that a heretic dared to cause commotion in the main temple. For this sin, he aimed to cut the throat and rip out the heart of the hero with the help of divine sickles. He was preparing to attack the guy. The hero jumped over him and then, with a brutal kick, decapitated the priest. Tears gushed from the guard's eyes as soon as he saw Ronald's murder. The man tried to climb up to kill the guy, but the Lord got ahead of him, jumped on him, and punched a hole in the ground with him. Henry was furious and shouted at them. Because of them, he was forced to hit his friend. This was their plan if the penetration of an infidel into the city was discovered. The guys decided to be the first to find and capture Hank, and then take him to the tower so that he could destroy the heart of the city in one fell swoop. New Moon was angry that he had to hit the hero. He activated an essence that strengthens proportionally to the level of anger. He wanted to beg forgiveness from Hank. In anger, he began to destroy everything around him, inflicting injuries on himself. The guy was covered in blood and apologized to the hero. The great king approached the bloody Henry and stopped him, taking him by the hand. The boy asked if he had dealt well with the guard. The younger brother began asking question after question. He wondered if Hank was going to eat the swords, if he was hurt, and also remarked that they suited him very well. He saw that the hero was stained with his blood. He apologized and asked him not to come closer until he washed it off him. But Hank put his hand on his head and praised him for his actions, which made the guy incredibly happy. He started shouting again, happy that the hero had praised him and acknowledged him. He was completely delighted and tried to attract everyone's attention to share this news. The king again remembered Chester's words about people whose minds were clouded during the hunt in the New World being beasts. He tried to think about what he should do with the new moon in the future. Then the incredible happened. The voice of the god Aruga appeared. He was angry that these heretics dared to desecrate his holy land. He began activating the transmigration of the soul. The priest lifted his head and placed it on his shoulders. The deity was about to punish the unbelievers. His body began to transform. The guards noticed the appearance of the god. They fell on their knees and began to bow to him in respect. They all extolled his name. Aruga descended from the heavens. Heinrich was delighted with the arrival, while Hank was completely unable to comprehend what was happening. The young man remembered that everything happened exactly as it had happened to him when he was a believer. His body became the mediator. Thousands of huge hands with fingers appeared out of nowhere and grabbed all the guards, who considered it an honor to give up their souls and bodies. Aruga threw them all into his huge mouth and devoured them. The people continued to chant his name. They were glad to die at his hands. Henry noticed that all the people were thoroughly brainwashed. Their faith turned out to be deeper than it might seem at first glance. Hank called them psychos. Then the huge mouth grew into a huge worm with a human jaw. It continued to eat every person in its path. Some began to run away. The inhabitants screamed in complete confusion. They thought that the test was over with the murder of the high priest. It seemed impossible to overcome something like that. They believed that there was only one person who could defeat this new monster, and his name was the Great King. Remembering that last time, he also saved them, calling on them to free themselves from the place where they were bullied, offering to follow him. Hannah didn't share the general enthusiasm. People were encouraging Hank to fight the deity, but she was sure that they wanted the guy dead. But the hero was already climbing the stairs again. He activated his second essence beyond the horizon, and at the same time received a cult of his personality. The main conditions for receiving were met, and the legend of Hank's existence began to take place. He began to understand who the gods really are. He considered them to be pathetic creatures with intelligence who passed the final test and then demanded access to god status, which they received in the game. The boy believed that Aruga should not be proud of his title, because none of those who get rid of their followers whenever they please are worthy of the title of god. He called such creatures nothing less than monsters. The monster with the soul of Aruga roared at the thought that a mere mortal dared to mock him. He called his body the sun god. He had a flame that could burn the entire universe. His rage was great. He wanted to kill the guy. The deity sent a stream of flame towards Hank, thereby melting the earth. The guy could not call him either a god or a devil, but only a monster. The city began to burn. Stones fell around from the blows of the god. Hannah protected herself in a sphere shell, but she barely withstood the flames. The girl was irritated that he was behaving ignorantly there. Heinrich approached her. He was sure that since Hank called God a monster, it meant he could be killed. She asked him if he had seen the king, but it seemed obvious to him that the boy had gone to deal with Aruga. The power of a god depends on the vessel he resides in, so gods choose stronger vessels, but Aruga chose quantity over quality. The result is an incredibly powerful creature, but the more power he uses, the more vessels he needs. Otherwise, he will begin to weaken. Heinrich was confident that they had a chance to win, but now they could only prevent Hank from achieving his goal. The guy noticed that this was not the person she was used to, so she should not interfere with the Great King's battle. But suddenly he decided to go with her if she wanted. He had a plan to help Hank win the battle with the monster. The hero noticed that the creature's body was getting smaller, just as Heinrich had told him. He heard from a distance how his body was being destroyed. Although it was huge, it was poorly made. The guy decided to put the coins into strength until the monster's strength ran out. He also noticed an innovation, strength points, but did not know what they meant. Hank began to advance, but quickly realized that the monster had blocked his approach with rocks. Suddenly, Heinrich appeared next to him, carrying Hannah. She was not very happy about it. The guy suggested having some fun. For starters, he decided to help clear the road. But the king did not want to involve them in this battle and ordered them to run away from here. The monster threw a huge beam of light at them. New Moon still held the girl on his shoulders. She screamed, asking to let her go. Hank was also nervous. He was afraid that the monster would harm them. Suddenly, Aruga released a huge purple flame from his chest. Scared, the guy let go of the girl. She was very scared and irritated at the same time. But her father did not leave her, asking her not to worry, since the jade stone inside her could reflect any blows, which Henry took advantage of, using the girl as a shield. Her internal defense worked perfectly. There was no trace of hellfire on the guys. Then the master decided to use her ability to repel the attack. He quickly moved, holding her and sending beams in the other direction. The guy was very happy that his hopes regarding her talent were justified. He threw her up in the air to celebrate, noting that Hannah was a useful player. The monster Aruga was running out of strength. He was melting before our eyes. His faith was weakening. He urgently needed believers to absorb. His teeth began to fall out and his eyes bulged out of their sockets. He sent them out to search for prey, demanding that they find people. Hank was completely disappointed that Henry did not keep his promise and did not protect the girl. But the guy objected to him. He pointed to the bright stone in the middle of Hannah's chest, a green-yellow mineral made of shimmering jade. It was the girl's second essence. The hero remembered her father telling him about it. But New Moon doubted the power of the element. He suspected that it absorbed light and stored magical power. Her first essence, capable of creating absolutely any objects at her will using magical power. Her essences were perfectly compatible with each other. He also assumed that the mineral was now completely filled with the magical power of Aruga's light beam. But Hannah was already tired of the guy constantly using her as he wanted without her permission. She forbade him to do this, being very offended. Suddenly, one of the monster's eyes appeared in front of her. It looked at the girl, and then it shot a beam of light at her, which instantly reflected off her stone. And she didn't even notice the attack, trying to close her eyes from the brightness. Hank asked if she was okay. She said yes, but also noticed that they were surrounded by many monster eyes. They fired beams of light at the boys, trying to kill them, but Heinrich managed to react in time. He grabbed the girl again and ran around the hero at high speed, using her as a human shield. Hannah no longer had any strength. She could barely breathe, and New Moon suggested that they leave the city right now since Hank didn't need it. He was sure that the whole city was a vessel of this monster. They worshipped him, and he devoured them in order to gain strength and will do so until he kills the hero. Aruga continued to catch his believers. Then he put them in his mouth and his size grew incredibly. The monster demanded that everyone bow before him. His huge hands roamed the streets of the city and grabbed people running away and screaming in fear. His fingers and palms also had jaws that could eat a person, which they did successfully. People did not understand why they had to go through this if the test was over. The city's inhabitants rushed to the main gates, but they were locked, as all the guards had been killed, and they knocked on the doors, asking to be let out. One of the girls cried from fear and hopelessness. She thought that their only way out was to pray. But her friend was surprised by her impulse, since there was no one to ask. The townspeople turned to look at the tower. They could see their village being destroyed, thick smoke billowing from the fire. Although they didn't know who to pray to, their only salvation was Hank, who was ready to attack the monster, his faith points growing exponentially. Hannah was tired of being a shield. She started to get mad and scream at the eyes running everywhere. She wanted to be left alone. She was crushing them with her foot when Hank called out to them to be ready. He was going to destroy them all at once. The girl asked him if he had a plan on how to do this, so he asked her to lend him her power. He couldn't understand why this was happening, but he felt that his strength was overflowing. He was sure that he would definitely not lose. At the same time, the monster only became bigger and angrier. He was burning with fire and destroying everything in his path. He demanded that the infidels return the divine object to him. Hank raised his sword to show off his prize. Although he had never used it before, he would try to defeat Aruga with it. Henry was filled with confidence that the hero would succeed. Even though he had lost his memory, his body remembered everything. Hank thought so too. The monster was burning with rage. They decided to start the battle. The guy asked Hannah if she was ready. The girl began to accumulate all her energy in order to then spread it to the king. She tried to release the light and strengthen the magical power. The enraged deity Aruga tried to get to him. Hank decided to give Kent temporary access to his body, and the power was unlocked. The great king began with a mad martial arts dance, circling around the monster, inflicting countless wounds on it. He used sickles in his attack, calling for Aruga to disappear. The weapons were tempered in fire and caused the monster unbearable pain. The deity could no longer resist. He was burning alive in his own streams of fire. Then Hank delivered the final blow, jumping into the very whirlpool. There was a powerful explosion that finally destroyed the monster, covering Hannah with a blast wave. New Moon watched from the side as the smoke slowly cleared. The girl was completely exhausted, but fortunately, the main test was completed, and the incarnation of the god Aruga lost. The guys started calling Hank. He was next to the monsters at the moment of the explosion, which left a huge crater in front of the tower. Suddenly, Heinrich grabbed the girl by the throat. He was looking for any elements that had at least some class. He was in a hurry and didn't have time to explain. Trying to pull the green-yellow mineral out of her chest, he caused the girl great pain. Tears rolled from her eyes. She could not scream, since his other hand tightly covered her mouth. Suddenly, they noticed that people began to throw all their weapons into one common pile. They offered to give everything to Hank. Heinrich collected all the items in a bag and carried it to the crater. The others followed him, and a figure of a burnt man appeared from the smoke. The boys quickly went down the crater to meet Hank. He came out all blackened and with burnt hair, holding sickles in his hands. Hannah was very happy to see that he was alive. Tears appeared in her eyes. The girl wanted to hug the guy, but was afraid that she would hurt him. Henry considered all her emotions useless and advised the girl to discard them and finally give the hero elements. Otherwise, he would remain standing still. Suddenly, an angel appeared behind them. It was Michael. He didn't expect the guy to be so good and exceed all his expectations. He still thought Hank was a funny boy, praising him for holding out so long against a dangerous opponent. Suddenly, an angel of power appeared behind them. Everyone stared at him. The hero still held the swords in his hands, and he was ready to use them again if necessary. Castiel flew in to congratulate Hank on his victory in the battle. The hero overcame the main test, so he becomes the new master of the Holy Land of Katla. He then sent his blessings to the new god in the form of Hank, thereby healing his wounds and returning him to his former appearance. People began to come closer and closer to look at the new deity. They surrounded the boys and just stood in silence. From that moment on, the Holy Land and the believers entrusted all their wishes to the hero, since he fulfilled all the conditions and was worthy of being called a god. The area was only part of Aruga's lands, and Hank had banished his incarnation, so the conditions for granting the lands into ownership had not actually been met. But Castiel wanted to give the guy what he deserved, so he decided to use his power on behalf of the main god. He then asked what holy land Hank would like to have. He thought for a moment, but knew for sure that he wanted one where people would not kill each other. He also didn't want to have anything to do with monsters and people with animal instincts anymore, like on one of his days in his past life with Gina. Suddenly, he found himself where he dreamed of being. There was a lot of greenery around. Small houses were adjacent to high-rise buildings. Hannah also appeared in Hank's new world. She ran up to him from behind and hid behind the hero's strong back. He asked how she was doing. The girl felt fine, but there was not a soul else around them. They had the feeling that they were alone there. Henry appeared out of nowhere in front of them. He was surprised that there really were no murders on the new Holy Land, and there was no place for animals. He felt a little lost as he couldn't get into town to see Hank, so he said goodbye to them and promised to meet next time. The newly minted god did not think that his words would be taken so literally. He tried to stop the new moon, but it was too late. The hero regretted that he wished such a holy land for himself. In the very center of the new city, there was a tower. A fence was built around the periphery. There were also mountains instead of asphalt. All the roads were covered in grass and trees. Everything here reminded the hero of the world before the test, except that there was nothing else here. All the cafes were empty. In this city, the very existence of animals was forbidden. These are people who went crazy during the Enlightenment, which made them aggressive. The guy wondered in his head if this city was a reflection of his true desires. Suddenly, an announcement appeared about the first offender. The punishment was expulsion from the city. Hank dropped his bag and ran as fast as he could to the gate. He saw two men and a woman with a child in her arms running towards him across the desert sands. But a huge devourer worm crawled out of the ground. The new god hurried the people, shouting at them not to stop and to run with all their might. The worm had almost caught up with them. Then the man decided to kick the woman so that she would fall with the child, thus giving him a chance to reach the city this time. The monster caught up with the mother and child, and he continued to run. But by killing them, he broke the first law. The system recognized him as mentally ill and expelled him. Hannah also approached the disappointed Hank. She noticed that she had seen this man several times before, but as she approached the gate, everything disappeared. The hero understood that as long as a person had a beastly nature, he could not enter. He was transferred to another place because he had chosen such a law for the Holy Land. The guys went into Hank's former apartment. They connected the power generator. Then the guy turned on his laptop and sat down on the couch. He also decided to visit his university. Everything was there as he remembered. But the guy could not forget Henry. He thought about how to get him back. Meanwhile, Hannah was taking a bath. The girl was delighted to finally wash herself. She had not had such an opportunity for a long time. Noticing that the only thing missing was beer, she sat down next to him. Hank had already changed into his usual clothes, and the girl was only wearing his t-shirt, and the guy asked her not to sit next to him like that. The guy's laptop was open, and the girl asked if he had watched a movie on it since she wanted to too, and arbitrarily opened one of the folders. But instead of a movie, she came across an adult movie. Hank felt ashamed and tried to deny that these were not his files, while Hannah tried to quickly delete the shameful information. Suddenly, the girl asked him an unexpected question. She was interested in why she also did not disappear, because she also went through enlightenment, and she killed people with her abilities. Her powers scared her because they acted out of control and caused a lot of pain to people. She also thought that she would have to become a beast to survive. Hannah liked this city because here she could finally forget about such thoughts and no longer be afraid that she would kill someone. Out of the blue, Hank suggested eating to improve the mood. He took out chicken noodles and suggested leaving the reasoning and finally watching a movie. They chose which movie to watch, turned it on. They experienced the whole range of emotions and feelings. They ate soup, laughed, and cried. The girl began to fall asleep, leaning on the guy's shoulder. He was worried that she would catch a cold. He said that he would sleep in the bed, and Hannah decided to lie down in the sleeping bag to restore her mental strength. She laughed sheepishly, as the sleeping bag smelled of Hank, which was exactly what she had been counting on. He had decided to go out for some fresh air. But instead of falling asleep, she opened her laptop again and started looking at the guy's photos. Finding a photo of a girl, she became jealous and closed the screen. As Hank stepped outside, he received a notification that his faith points, which turn people's faith into power, had increased again. The guy was thinking that perhaps Heinrich and the people who disappeared back then were looking for him. Instead of appreciating those who were there and supported him, he was only thinking about how to survive. He also wanted to understand why most people are crazy freaks and beasts. But there are also normal people like Chester. He thought about how to return the old world to live with them. The hero remembered how Gina told him that the great king must lead the people to kill the main god. Hank had the idea to call the salesman Marie. She immediately came to him, but he just looked at her and was silent. Then she became curious about what he wanted from her. And then Hank was able to confess to her that he was planning to kill God. She was stunned by this news and asked again whether he was serious or not. The arms dealer was extremely scared by the hero's desire. She definitely didn't expect to hear these words from him, and then she yelled at the guy. Marie wondered why she was being punished like this, and also thought Hank's decision was stupid, because if the angels heard, they wouldn't leave her alone. But Kent was inspired by the hero's determination. She knew that he was strong, then adding that he excited her with his persistence. The girl noticed the goddess and with undisguised admiration recognized her as the goddess of pleasure, Mrs. Kent. Hank tried to drive the deity away, asking her to shut up as she was only making things more difficult. She pretended she hadn't seen or heard anything and wouldn't tell anyone anything. He promised Marie that if she stayed, she would not regret it. He was going to give her all the divine items he could get. For example, he wanted to give her the pair of Aruga moonsickles that he had just won in a battle with a god for sale, and the girl immediately showed interest. She picked up the blades to verify the authenticity of the items. Their molecular structure was like a supernova. Marie asked if he had used the daggers to kill the deity. Hank confirmed her suspicions and asked if she would be able to sell them at all. The saleswoman asked the guy to wait a minute, took out her phone, dialed the number of the sales association, then said that her client had a high-end item. She also confirmed to them that it was genuine and then apologized to the hero as she had to leave for a short consultation. She was gone for only a few seconds. When she returned, she looked very pleased. The guy asked her what the community had told her. To begin with, she was told to make a deal, and in exchange, she was promoted from a novice salesman to a special status peddler. The girl was very happy with this news and was very proud of herself, because now she had the right to buy high-class elements. The promotion process to a special class began. Marie disappeared in a bright flash of light, and then her appearance began to transform and her clothes changed. In her new image, the girl was ready to buy even his heart. But Hank was a little uncomfortable with the way she flirted with him. Realizing he was in no mood for jokes, she suggested they get down to business. First of all, they provide a high-class element for free. She took out a magic ball, then held it out in her hand in front of the king and asked him to choose whatever he liked. Hank was surprised that such a thing existed. The catalog contained items of the highest and super highest class, which were supplied by first-class sellers. He wanted to ask the girl a question. She was ready to answer anything except personal information. Then he asked if she knew the source of the god's power. Marie was stunned, but replied that the source of strength is fear. Not all people sincerely follow the deity from the very beginning. But when they see the miracles they perform, they have no choice but to bow their heads in recognition of the difference in power. People, captivated by miracles, gain faith. They retell stories, making legends out of them, and ultimately, by binding people with fear, God gains power. After her story, Hank thought about fear, asking for the status. He found out that the faith item was added to the status window after the battle with Aruga. He believed that there must be a reason why the counter that had been reset due to using power in battle was increasing again. As he began to look through the catalog of possible gifts, he stuck his hand in the window and pulled out an amulet of a frog that collects and absorbs without limit, which was simply made for storing food. Then he remembered about the pills and offered to buy them too. Marie was delighted with the divine item and agreed. Just as she began to thank him, suddenly the curse began to be cast on the pills, one after another, almost without stopping. After the curse was cast, the girl became very scared and began frantically packing her bag, apologizing for her arrogant behavior. The living pills laughed at her, and Hank found out that it was Kent, and Marie refused to buy them and said that she was closing her shop. The hero did not insist. The guy returned to the room and fell asleep, and in the morning Hannah woke him up. She climbed onto his bed in her short and tight nightgown and said that something was happening outside. He received a notification that a large number of lawbreakers had been discovered. The punishment was exile, but the people continued on their way and approached the gate. Realizing that something was going on, they started running, trying to get there first, pushing everyone around. But as they approached the gate, everyone disappeared. Hank watched what was happening. He was surprised that so many people wanted to get into his city. Hannah did not understand where they were coming from. Two men in the crowd got into an argument. They desperately tried to enter, but immediately after one of them stabbed the other, they both disappeared into a portal of bright light. The hero continued to watch the people coming again and again. Their number did not decrease, but none of them could get inside. He did not understand what was happening and where they all came from. Meanwhile, 2 kilometers southeast of the Holy Land of Katla, a sand hotel was built between the rocks, and in it was located a train for crossing the desert. The man in the eye patch lit a cigar. "He is the head of the expedition of the Aruga believers, Leon." He asked the others how the situation was. He was informed that all who had entered the city on Holy Land had not yet been identified, and all who unsuccessfully tried to enter were being moved to another location. Deputy Chief Keanu continued, "According to eyewitnesses from Katla, the first Holy Land of Aruga will be captured by that man. The god's followers are scattered across the continents, but most of them have been used up and the territory has been captured by the enemy. The number of remaining Bemurians was negligible, as was the likelihood that the incarnation of Aruga could escape." He considered their expedition mission extremely important. One of the girls in the army shared with her friend standing next to her that she really liked Hank. They looked at each other and smiled at each other. Leon heard their conversation. He approached the one who was talking about the hero and then demanded that she take out her tongue and put out his cigar on it. The chief became very angry when he heard the king's name. He ordered her to never say that name again, otherwise he would sew her mouth shut and feed her cut-off tongue to the dogs. The girl covered her mouth with her hands and cried in pain. He didn't understand how someone like Hank could be called a god. Then he decided to speak out in front of his large army. His army numbered more than 6,000 men, as well as volunteers from the inhabitants of Bamura, all of whom stood before him in their ammunition and fully armed. He informed them that according to the information available, there were only 2 in Katla, Hank and Hannah, and he also forbade comparing the hero to a god, because without powers, he considered it an empty title. They managed to take out and save some of the divine objects and Aruga's blessing. They lay on the back of the car and were carefully covered with cloth. Their plan was to surround Katla and besiege it, and to place 3 divine objects around the city's fence. And after that, they were going to destroy this semblance of a god in the person of Hank together with the main army. Then the commander-in-chief shouted that in this way this land would be in their power again. In order to receive the status and reward from the Holy Land, everyone in the army, as well as volunteers, had to immediately take up arms, because they were on the territory of God. Meanwhile, on the beach near the hero's new city, there were people. A man in uniform was looking through binoculars at the gate. A girl was lying under an umbrella, and there was a saddled chicken with them. The girl asked her subordinate if he saw a smoke signal, since they had wasted a lot of slaves. But so far, not a single person had been able to enter. Chloe, the head of the scouts, complained about the intense heat. She wanted to quickly finish everything and get out of there. The assistant opened a bottle of wine and poured it into her glass, hoping that the device they had sent would comply with the new law since no one else knew about its hidden status. But Chloe believed that the new god himself had said outright that he wanted to get rid of the animals. Although she was curious if he himself was pure, in the hell that has come to this world, a simple boy would not have survived. But before enlightenment, the same thing happened in the world the girl shared. From history, she thought that the beast was the true essence of man, and the current Katla was just the grumbling of an idealist. At the same time, Hank seemed to her a hypocrite who never opened his eyes. She longed to destroy his new reality and kill him. The gates to the new city swung open, and a fair-haired boy in torn clothes walked through them. The kids were very happy to see the new resident. They were glad to receive him, finally. Among the crowd of animals, a man was able to reach them. The boy looked tired. Hank squatted down in front of him, introduced himself to him, and then asked him if he came alone and where his parents were. But instead of answering, the boy said that he was ready, which stunned the boys. Then he opened his coat and there was a homemade explosive device. His finger was on the detonator. The boy no longer looked tired or upset. He was glad that he was the first citizen. And then he pressed the button and a powerful explosion occurred. Chloe's assistant reported that he had a video of a smoke signal. The girl immediately jumped out of the chair and was ready to move out immediately, and asked the assistant to go back and prepare a bath for her. The girl happily demonstrated her essence. Instead of hands, she had long ribbons with sharp spikes and an arrow at the end. She was eager to have fun. The car with the divine items and Aruga's blessing moved out from its hiding place in the mountains. They were heading to Katla. Luckily, Hannah managed to use her shield ball ability, so she and Hank were not harmed. The Bemurians began to beat the drums. They stood on a mobile platform next to the gate, and a car also brought and unloaded divine objects to the designated positions. Leon ordered to destroy everything in the new city, but ordered not to touch the tower in the center of the Holy Land. He was very serious. They fired a destructive column of bright purple light. The commander and deputy were pleased as the projectile hit the target. Everything around was in a cloud of dust. When the horizon cleared up a little, the guys saw that the city wall was destroyed. Deputy Keanu informed the chief that the outer wall was destroyed. Leon was delighted and noted that the rest of the walls had also fallen. The leader of the expedition of believers shouted and ordered them not to stop and to continue shelling the city until they got tired of it. Everyone who tried to enter the city was most likely killed. Suddenly, a man covered in blood crawled out from behind the rocks. He asked them why they didn't let them in. But a ray of light flew in again. Hannah was worried about possible other survivors. She rushed to open the gate. She was afraid that they would all be torn apart, and it would be better to move them to another place than to leave them here. Destructive rays of light hit the city again and again, destroying residential houses and buildings, and thick black smoke came from everywhere. Hannah was very upset that they continued to destroy buildings and the entire city. She did not understand why they were doing this, but she was most upset about other things, like not having finished watching the drama or her plans to plant a vegetable garden. She also dreamed that when there were more children, they would plow the land together and discuss the harvest of pumpkins and potatoes. Every year, she would hold a festival for everyone who wanted to attend. They would congratulate families who had children, and everyone would envy their friendly group. The girl began to cry, because in their city it is forbidden to kill, and everyone must follow this one rule. Hank decided to support his friend by putting his hand on her shoulder and promising that her dream would definitely come true. But then he suggested that she not wait for this to happen, but go to meet her themselves. He took out a certain object and released a purple mist from there, which transformed the hero and dressed him in a uniform. Kent showed up again, she looked at the guy, and then said that it was her gift to him. She slightly improved it, he didn't mind, because in some sense he is the same god as she is. She continued to whisper to him, offering to turn this place into their joint temple, and also asked him to gather as many believers as possible so that they could fight together against everyone. Hank didn't want to listen to her say anything else, so he threw her off and then called Hannah to go behind the wall together. They were immediately attacked by Chloe with her chains with sharp tips. The hero was able to dodge them, but the girl launched them again. She was glad that they finally met. It was not easy for her to organize a meeting with him. She knew that for this she would have to destroy everything. Suddenly she smiled a sinister smile, crossing her sword arms, and told the hero that nothing had changed. But Hank did not understand what she was talking about. The girl laughed. She remembered that he did not remember anything. She decided to explain to him that the last time he was enlightened, he had a group of cowards and pacifists, and then they all hid in a cave. But then they were robbed, and all the people were killed. And Chloe decided to confess that it was she who arranged that bloody massacre and killed everyone with her own hands. Then she remembered about one person, a man who, no matter how much you killed, continued to come back to life. Hannah realized that she was talking about her father. The girl became furious when she heard that it was Chloe who was involved in the murder of everyone in the camp, and her willpower began to rapidly decrease. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she grabbed her spears and threw them at the head of the scouts, who welcomed her into the beast world. Chloe continued to swing her chains and surrounded Hannah with them, who found it difficult to break free. Hank feared for the life of his friend, whom he promised to protect. Hannah was very angry. She had a beastly grin. But Hank managed to jump towards her and took the main blow of the spikes on himself, covering the girl with himself. Even though the protagonist had invested all of his winnings into defense, he still felt a lot of pain from the sharp chain cutting into the skin of his hands. Suddenly, Hannah broke down. She started screaming and trying to break free. But the guy held her back and asked her to calm down, because she was being provoked. But in doing so, he inflicted even deeper wounds on himself. But the girl remembered how many people Chloe had hurt, how many she had killed, how many dead bodies lay in the shelter then. The chains penetrated the skin more and more. Then Hank grabbed them and pulled them toward himself. The head of the scouts could not resist, and the hero decided to try to absorb the iron. As soon as he said the code word, all the chains and spikes immediately disappeared, including from Chloe's hands, but instead of healing, they only made his wounds worse. It was a bloody bomb. The head scout was happy that he had activated his essence. She noted that even if the guy was hungry, he shouldn't eat anything. It tasted very spicy. Hank was bleeding, but then he noticed a pond behind her. He continued to come up with an escape plan while the girl mocked him, hinting at her spicy taste. Chloe pulled out her chains again and threw them at the heroes, but the guy used the source and mad dance technique and used the water from the lake. He took off with Hannah in his arms, hiding behind the flow of water, leaving behind huge waves that were mixed with sand from the desert. The enemy was covered by just such a wave of sand, and she found herself covered in it and in a strange position. She was very irritated because of this. After shaking herself off, she decided to try attaching another weapon to her hands. This time, she took out pistols from their holsters. The indignant and furious girl realized that the boys were able to escape, so she went looking for them, along the way promising to tear off their arms and legs when they met. Hank brought Hannah to the cave. He wanted to know how she was feeling and asked her to come to her senses. But she continued to puff with anger, remembering their past life. She thought back to their earlier interactions in the shelter, to her cutting her father's hair, or to her trying to calm a crying child. But all her wonderful memories of life in the past world were overshadowed by hundreds of bodies killed at the hands of the head of the intelligence officers. Hank tried to calm her down, but she kept screaming, intending to avenge them all. The guy tried to convince her that everything was okay now. Tears flowed from her eyes. She remembered her childhood, when she sat little in her father's arms and he promised to protect her. The hero understood that he couldn't cope, since the girl began to give up, and decided to use the ticket to call the seller Marie. She immediately noticed his cuirass, which she liked from the very beginning, but Hank did not waste time and immediately asked if she had a good item for stabilizing the psyche. The merchant was a little upset, since most of them allow interference in the mind and hide the status, so they are sold illegally and can get you arrested. But the guy didn't have time to listen to her objections. He asked again whether she had such a product or not, and only then did she start looking for it in the catalog. She was able to find a nomad headdress that protected against harm. If she put it on, all her thoughts would return to normal. Marie put a hat on the girl and sat at her bedside when Hank suddenly decided to leave and asked her to look after Hannah while he was gone. She didn't want to stay there without protection, but she still agreed to provide a special service to a big client because their desire is a command to her. The guy came out of the cave. He hit the rocks with his fist. He couldn't understand why he was so weak if they said about him that he was like a god. He remembered Chester's words about his request to take care of his daughter. The only thing he wanted was for her to survive and for the hero to be a benefactor for them. But he doubted that anything had changed since the moment when he lost fights. Suddenly, Chloe appeared from behind the rock. She laughed because she caught the god in self-flagellation. She reminded him of the words that if he was in unbearable pain, then she would gladly help and kill him. She raised her right hand, from which a long pistol was sticking out, and began to shoot at the hero. But instead of bullets, only her blood flew around. Hank decided to take advantage of the essence. He raised a sandstorm, thus seizing the moment to activate his blades instead of feet. Jumping out of the sand, he sharply ran the blade across the girl's body, but instead of being afraid, she continued to encourage him and asked him to strike again. Chloe has masochistic tendencies. She enjoyed the fact that he was hurting her. She screamed with delight and asked him to continue, although her body was already cut up. But just as Hank was about to give her another cut, she lashed out with her chain and hooked the tip onto the rock, then climbed up. But the guy still managed to run the dagger along her body, causing blood to spurt out of the wound and hit the hero as well. Then Chloe activated her essence, and immediately after that, there was another explosion. Hank was badly hurt. He was lying on his back and groaning. The girl was not hurt, although she still had the cuts inflicted by the hero and blood was flowing from them. She was unhappy that the guy was not moving, although he called himself a god. Noticing the brand of the goddess of pleasure on his cheek, she licked it, noting that he himself was just a slave of a mad god. Chloe was already completely on top of Hank. Her dagger entered his hand. He couldn't move. The girl thought that he was only pretending to be innocent and called him a hypocrite. She was going to cut off his arms and legs and then hang him in the room. She wondered if he would be able to make any sound. The girl wanted revenge for what he did to her in the past enlightenment. He cut off her legs, wanting everything to come back to him tenfold. The hero asked with a smile on his face what humiliation she was talking about. Was there something between them? He couldn't remember anything like that. Chloe, although angry, continued to burst into laughter. She liked that he was so arrogant and she could no longer hold back. Everything inside her was burning. Hank was bleeding. He couldn't move. She was going to chop him into mincemeat and put him on display on holy ground. Her blood was very dangerous. She used her blood bomb ability, but suddenly the hero stood up and grabbed her. The girl was surprised that he was still able to move. Then there was an explosion that even her swimsuit was badly burned. But literally the next moment he cut off her head and her hand, the girl fell dead. Hank also lay covered in blood. With his last strength, the hero took out of his pocket his amulet of a glutton frog that can collect and absorb elements without limitation. Then he said the code word. Meanwhile, Leon was scolding his army subordinates. He ordered them to shoot without stopping and did not understand why they stopped. The employee was very frightened by such an attack. He apologized and tried to justify himself by saying that all the weapons overheated due to continuous work. He also said that the weapon needs some time to cool down, otherwise it could explode and destroy everything around it. Leon pushed the guy so that he fell. The man was running out of patience. He couldn't wait any longer. Keanu, standing next to him, didn't understand why he was screaming. The commander-in-chief again shouted at everyone around him. He ordered to seize the Holy Land and kill all the infidels. The man looked scary. On his eye patch was the sign of Aruga. It said that this was all an order from God, and everything must be destroyed in the name of God. Using his power, he began to hypnotize his army, programming them to kill all non-believers in Aruga. Then finally, the cooling of the system was completed, and the order to fire was given. Leon was delighted and ordered to wipe the city into dust so that not a trace remained. The divine beam of destruction was directed at the city again. The buildings were burning, they were destroyed. But they did not stop. The Bemurians advanced with weapons in their hands and in SUVs. They ran towards the city wall, ready to destroy everything in their path. One of the signalmen reported that a survivor of the shell had been found, and that the man turned out to be Hank. The commander-in-chief became furious. He demanded to incinerate the king. The machine with the divine item began to fire at the city again. The hero came close to the walls of Katla. He leaned his hand against it. He could not allow anyone to destroy it and was determined to win his city back. The guy activated his absorption essence and added a frog to it, then said the code word and began to absorb the entire city. The believers and followers of Aruga did not understand what was happening. The projectile failed to hit the target, since all the buildings except the tower disappeared. After the hero finished the process of eating, he felt a little overwhelmed by what he had consumed. He felt indigestion. Michael came down from the sky to look at the vanished city. Only the tower remained standing in the middle of the former Katla. He admitted that until now he had seen various enlightenments, but this was the first time in his practice that someone had completely swallowed up the entire earth. But at the same time, Michael was sure that no matter who the god was, he would not be able to deal with this situation. An angel of power appeared. The latter looked at the consequences of the absorption of the city with displeasure. Hank, meanwhile, continued to stand in the dust left after the disappearance of buildings. The army was finally able to enter the city. They ran to the tower. The hero requested his status. He again used the coins to increase his physical strength, durability, and speed as much as possible. He then decided to restore his appearance, and then noticed that his religion points had decreased, and assumed that it was due to his inactivity over the past couple of months. He thought that people saw him as a little animal that could be easily eaten, and could not sense the power in him, much less accept him as a new god. So Hank decided to make an impression, and pushing off, he arched high into the sky and then landed right into the armed crowd, creating a sand explosion. They immediately recognized the guy, but were not happy to see him, planning to kill him to take everything he had. The hero was not ready to be given to them alive. He used his ability and again used his sharp daggers instead of feet, starting to cut everyone and everything. The Bemurians, watching from afar, howled in shock at how easily the hero dealt with such a crowd, and hoped that he would come to them, and literally at that very second he was ready to attack them. They immediately knelt before him, begging for mercy. They were ready to surrender, promising that they would not fight, because they were simple standard bearers. Hank had already raised his leg and almost hit the speaker, but changed his mind, but killed everyone around, taking pity on these two standard bearers. Leon screamed and was indignant. He could not believe how it was that an entire armed crowd could not seize one person. The commander-in-chief ordered to get rid of the hero. They launched the light cannon again, but this time into the crowd in which Hank stood. The guy was surprised that they were doing this, because besides him, there were many representatives of the believers of the god Aruga who was fighting against him. The guy began to squint from the bright light that hit right in front of him, but it didn't hit anyone else, as Hannah managed to get to them and acted as a shield. Although the girl still had her hat on, she felt as before she was inspired. She asked how long they had been waiting for her and informed them that she was ready to start fighting. Hank approached his accomplice. He became curious why she was still wearing a hat. Suddenly she liked it, but Hannah completely forgot to take it off, as she was in a hurry to save the hero. Then the newly minted god approached one of the standard bearers. He wanted to know which side of the attack their leader was on, and promised not to touch them if they told the truth. The man immediately, without thinking, pointed in the direction the guy needed. He pointed to the mountains closest to the city. The guys went in that direction. But the hero decided that it would be too long to walk, so he took Hannah in his arms and then flew in the indicated direction, leaving behind the surviving warriors. They watched the boys fly away. They doubted that the divine weapon would work on him. Even if they increased the number of soldiers, they believed that the divine warrior Hank was in front of them. The hero and the girl flew to an active stronghold, where the commander-in-chief and his deputy were located, as well as the rest of the army. Leon saw the guys flying up. He started shouting to the soldiers not to stop and to continue shooting at him. As soon as the purple beam reached them, Hannah immediately turned on her yellow-green defense gene and ricocheted the blow. The combatants raised their weapons and began to attack the flying hero. Then Hank decided that it was time to release the deity. His hair turned ash gray. He activated a mad martial arts dance and killed one of the most physically developed guards. Then, to add to the mad dance, he activated his ability to control the source, sending huge waves of water into the air. The great king remembered the words once spoken to him that the source of divine power is the fear of it. No man would willingly believe in such a cruel being, but when they see the miracles that the god performs, they have no choice but to bow their heads in recognition of the difference in power. People captivated by miracles gain faith. They retell the story, making legends out of them, and ultimately, by binding people with fear, God gains power. Hank remembered these words as he saw all the remaining warriors kneeling before him and now begging for mercy. They claimed that they could not kill them. They recognized him as the true God. His religious points increased every second. They all believed in his divine power. Before Hank could even comprehend what was happening, he was pierced by a new beam. It was Leon. He was controlling the new gun and declared that he could not recognize him as a true God. The man shot an arrow at the hero. It hit him in the stomach. He did not believe that a man like the hero could be a god. But Hannah was already rushing to his aid. She saw that the guards raised their weapons and began to shoot at the guy, piercing every part of him. But the hero still had the strength to resist. He rose into the air, then grabbed the ropes with his hands and said the code word. After being absorbed, all the arrows from his body disappeared and the wounds healed. The soldiers looked on in amazement, but then they pierced him with arrows again. Leon himself shot at him, demanding that the guy calm down since he couldn't use his skill, then ordered the remaining followers to continue. Then Hank activated his swords instead of the table and instantly cut them all. The commander-in-chief continued to order to shoot without stopping. The man activated the dogma of hell, which caused all the employees to lose their minds. They could no longer be responsible for their actions. Their bodies did not obey them. The conditions for activating the entity were met. It allowed one to control the body and mind of the one who was bound by the blood contract. Hank still had arrows in his body, but he decided to forestall a possible attack by the army and struck first. Two soldiers grabbed the hero from the side. One of them held his finger on the detonator, but he whispered that he did not want to die. Leon continued to scold and yell at his army subordinates, calling them scum and demanding that they continue to beat the hero until they themselves died. Suddenly, the believers of Aruga fell at Hank's feet. They recognized him as a god and worshipped him, begging for mercy. The hero's faith points increased again. He raised a storm of sand. The commander-in-chief did not understand why the guy was still unharmed. But the whole point was that due to the increase in the number of believers, the deity Hank received a unique symbol that raised all his statuses to the limit. He also acquired a unique ability, increased willpower, but the hero was not sure of its necessity. He remembered how Chester told him that he led people to kill God. He didn't have a particular reason, he just wanted to survive. And he also had an incredible need for strength, so if he was weak, he would die. Hank was well aware that this was not the power of a beast or a god, but the power of a man. And he appeared before everyone again, safe and sound, with golden feathers falling on him from the sky. The newly minted god decided to speak out to the remaining people. He understood that many were unhappy with the fact that he was a god, although they themselves would not mind being in his place. Hannah stood surrounded by soldiers who began to take off their gear and lower their weapons. Hank stood behind Leon. He pointed out to the man that he had no right to become a god. The commander-in-chief pulled out a hidden dagger from his hand and swung it at the king. Hank managed to jump back and was not injured. He jumped to the very edge of the ship. Behind him was a creature with wings. It was burning with a bright light. The very thought that Leon thought he had a chance to defeat the guy irritated him. He lit up the sky around him with a scarlet light. Deputy Keanu looked at the hero. He was stunned that the strongest of the phenomenal 9 had become a divine warrior before returning. The commander-in-chief screamed with rage. He was going crazy from the mark left by the god Aruga on all his believers. Hank continued. He didn't understand why they all called him a god. During his previous enlightenment, he killed many and captured other people's territory. He didn't consider himself a god. He despised himself and called himself a murderer. But Leon was completely out of control. His body was burning. He was screaming in pain and anger. His flesh was tearing apart. God Aruga used his body to transfer his being into it, and he called on everyone else to sacrifice themselves to become his incarnation. Something huge with giant claws burst out of the ground. Terrifying sounds came from its mouth, and its teeth were frightening in appearance. The hero immediately recognized the monster that had emerged as the incarnation of the god Aruga. He again had many eyes, and tongues of flame were coming out of his head. The monster became enraged. It screamed that everything belonged to it. It was ready to destroy the hero at any second. Aruga believed that these were his believers and his holy land, and everything that Hank stole from him belonged to him. The hero was a little confused. The great king noticed that compared to the previous incarnation of the god Katla, this time he appeared smaller in size. It was not difficult for him to attack the monster. With one blow of his foot and dagger, he cut off its arm and declared that he was now a god here. He ordered him to disappear, but Aruga did not see the boy as a threat. He believed that someone who had just received divine power did not dare to tell him what to do. There was almost nothing left of Leon's face. Red vessels were crawling out of it. He ordered to fear him, since the true God listens to the hero. Both monsters were rampant, chasing after the former believers of Aruga, devouring them to increase their power by drowning it. Even the deputy commander-in-chief ran away from them, along with the surviving representatives of the army. The deity screamed and called on them to fear him. People hid behind Hank's back. He tried to explain to the monster that fear is the source of faith, and faith is the source of strength. This is the essence of God. The hero wondered out loud whether this meant that as long as there was strength, everything else was unimportant, and he received the answer that this was exactly the case. The guy admitted that such bad and evil creatures made him sick, and he was irritated by the injustice in this state of affairs. Hank and Aruga wished each other death. They rushed to attack, fighting furiously, the monster screaming that his body was the sun god, the greatest of gods. The creature was not going to lose to the guy, especially to such a worthless person like him. Everything around was in waves of fire. The hero was striking at him. Suddenly, a small, hunched monster with a huge eye and 4 paws crawled out in front of him. Aruga was disappearing before his eyes. Remembering the words of the new moon, he repeated them to the deity because his power depended only on the fear of the believers. He had no outstanding abilities. No matter how many people he served, he had the lowest rank among the gods, but he wasn't even able to protect them. The hero was about to crush Aruga with his foot. He shouted that he should not dare to call himself a god after everything that had happened. Suddenly, a young guy in an army uniform attacked the hero from behind. He was holding a detonator and a belt with explosives in his hands, but immediately received a blow to the stomach. It was Chloe's friend, bleeding, his whole life flashing before his eyes. He was very loyal to the head of the intelligence service. In his past life, he was a believer of Aruga. But this faith destroyed him. He was used as a rad. He was starving. But a girl brought him bread. She offered him a deal. He would honor her more than a god, and then she would help him and save him from certain death. The boy pressed the detonator and the bomb exploded, throwing Hank to the ground, allowing the remaining incarnation of Aruga to escape death. The monster rushed towards his divine cannon. It immediately began to change, and from there another creature crawled out, even larger than the previous one. It was the divine power of the heart of the sun god. The hero turned to the warriors and advised them to retreat immediately. But they ran away. Although there was nowhere to run, it was not the time to think about enlightenment. The sun god promised that he would kill everyone and everything. When suddenly Hank shouted at them to stay. Then Hannah stepped in. She asked them to trust them and believe in the power of the divine warrior. The girl urged them to believe in their real god, but there was panic all around. The creature only grew in size. It had many tentacles, and the sun hung over its head. The angels came to see the madness that was happening. They suspected that Aruga was going to destroy the whole world and thought about how to stop him. Hank watched the sun, thinking about all the murders he had committed, countless of them. He did it for the sake of survival. He was overcome by doubts that there was no other way but to survive for the light of someone's deaths, and whether he lived only for the sake of continuing to live. Hannah realized that the hero was showing indecision, that he was in thought, so she decided to encourage him and shouted at him not to hesitate. The girl cried. She sincerely believed in him and in his strength. She believed that he could do anything and that they should save all these people together. After she called him her god, the guy was embarrassed. He could not imagine that she saw him like this and trusted him so much. Then he decided to turn to her and all the other people who believed in him. He promised not to let them down. The points of religion kept increasing. The sunlight that illuminates the universe will burn everything to the ground. A bright flash of purple light appeared from the sun above the monster's head. Hannah was afraid that the hero would not cope, and therefore urgently activated the green-yellow gene to protect all innocence, and noticed that from that moment on, the legend of Hank and the creation of the world began. The combatants began to use their best blows. The hero used the salamander's trident, and Aruga turned on the Armageddon division. The narrative returned to the world before the transformation. Immediately after Hank's crushing defeat in the ring, he went outside and drank water from a street drinking fountain. Gina came up to him. She sympathized with the hero and brought him a towel. The guy admitted that he started training to become stronger, but apparently boxing is not for him. But the girl touched him with her finger and assured him that he was wrong, as she was sure that his willpower was greater than anyone else's, and asked him not to give up. It turned out that the hero was unconscious, and this memory was a fantasy to him. Hannah was sitting next to him. She was very worried about him. Hank himself was surprised that he remained alive. He greeted the girl, and she suddenly pressed him to her chest. The hero's friend cried. She was afraid that he had died. Since he showed no signs of life, she was glad when he came to his senses. He was already starting to choke from her tight embrace. Hank began to worry that she would kill him from joy and began to try to get out. Hannah put his hand on her shoulders and helped him stand up. Then they walked toward the surviving warriors, who immediately fell to their knees in front of him. Even the deputy commander-in-chief swore allegiance. The people wanted to become the king's flock. They swore allegiance to the divine warrior. Hank didn't care about them. He passed by the believers with the help of the girl, but the military assured him that they now belonged to him. He was still very angry at them for trying to kill him recently. He asked if they really wanted to follow him and if they thought they had the right. Sitting down on the sand, the hero touched the ground with his hand and, using his glutton frog amulet, returned all the swallowed buildings to their place. The city was in a state of ruin. The newly recognized god stood in front of the gates and invited them to try to get inside. He said that his holy land itself would determine whether they had the right to live there or not. People immediately ran to the fence of Katla. They fought furiously and killed each other, trying to snatch the opportunity to get inside. Half of the people went into exile for behaving like animals. The other half lay dead on the doorstep. Hank and Hannah were standing next to each other holding hands when suddenly Keanu appeared in front of the gate, holding a little boy dressed in uniform on his back. He didn't understand why it was wrong to become a beast in order to survive. He tried to explain that people like him didn't really want to fight. He wondered if Hank wanted to become the kind of god who turned his back on those fighting for life. Hannah couldn't stand this lie. She screamed that Keanu was lying, since not everyone killed for the sake of survival and he should shut his mouth. The heroes were surrounded by angels who had descended from heaven. Michael entered into a polemic. He claimed that since Hank is a god, therefore whatever his will is, it is correct. He was furious because the hero had caused chaos in the education system, and he demanded that everything be returned to the way it was intended. Initially, the tests were led by the gods of other worlds, and by passing them, living beings became stronger and evolved. As it was during the commandment under the sun, evolution is in every way a controversial discipline for identifying the strongest. Hank didn't just kill a god, he became one himself. In fact, from the very beginning of enlightenment in this world, his actions were closest to divine. Michael also noted that back then, at the very beginning of enlightenment, he couldn't even see the entities when he checked the guy's system. They were hidden from him. This special essence can be activated when confronted with a god and can only be obtained by defeating one of them, which is why the hero received the seal of the god. The angel got too close to the hero, which was his mistake, as Hank sensed an opportunity and punched him in the face. Suddenly, Hannah spoke up. She was not herself, a beastly grin and wild eyes. She grinned at the fact that the angels had suddenly crawled out of their holes. She wondered who had made them suck up to the new god, and who had allowed them to look in his direction at all. The hero's friend had the mark of the deity Kent on her head. She held her sword at the ready, calling out the names of other gods. She wanted to know who sent them here. Then blue status windows appeared around him. A request for communication came from the pantheon of gods, and Hank could accept or decline it. The goddess of pleasure screamed that she would not give the guy to anyone. She considered herself his owner and was ready to fight against everyone. The hero grabbed her by the clothes and angrily whispered that she should leave him and leave the girl's body, and he did not dare to do this anymore. She hinted that he only used her when it was convenient for her, but he was still hers, and she would watch over him from above and asked him to stay strong. Then she let go of the girl and disappeared. Michael writhed in pain, and Hank looked at the star-strewn sky and wondered if the gods were looking at them now. The angel was sure that they were watching from where you couldn't even feel them, and he thought that the hero was enjoying it. The gods stood on a circular platform, in the middle of which a huge globe hovered. They watch everything that people do below.